Hey, Bitcoin wealth builders, Simon Dixon here, and welcome to episode 100 of Bitcoin Hard Talk. Now, if my lips aren't syncing too well and you're not used to the background, then it's because I'm on the move. Now, I ain't going to tell anybody where I am right now because the Zios will come after me. There are so many operations around the world. There is engineered civil unrest happening across the collective West. And I will be traveling. And so we're going to have a few different sets over the next few weeks. And today we've got some very special stuff to cover. Sorry if the internet is a little bit shaky because I'm in a room and this is the best internet I could get. Hopefully we will get through things crystal clear and everything will be okay. Right. What are we going to be doing for episode 100? Now, the macro side and the Bitcoin side and the geopolitical side are all moving in the direction that we've been covering. If you are a long-term listener, you'll know that we normally do this week in Bitcoin, this week in macro, and this week in geopolitics. But last week, we covered Trump at the United Nations because we are really witnessing a massive, massive shift. And those that are not following the money are falling for the narrative. And the narrative is telling you the exact opposite of what I believe to be happening. So we're going to break it all down because there was a very special speech. So firstly, the Bitcoin side. Bitcoin is approaching new all-time highs again. So we're close to the new all-time highs. As I've said, fixed supply assets in an environment of what we call fiscal dominance that we've been covering in the macro section, where people are able to protect themselves. Bitcoin is the most and the digital enforced fixed supply because of its proof of work mechanism. You can check out some of my other blogs if you want to get educated on this stuff and how to self-custody. That's not what we're going to be covering today. On the macro side, everything we've been preparing people for is happening in full swing. Fiscal dominance. What is fiscal dominance? It means that the debt-based Ponzi scheme is driving the world into a K-shaped economy. And the K-shaped economy means that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And all assets are about pumping up the price of stocks so that you have asset price inflation that supports the wealthy that own the assets, and everybody else in debt, the debt gets devalued. Of course, that devaluation comes from the government. And so by hook or by crook, the train cannot stop. The debt needs to be rolled over because as $7 trillion of debt becomes due, it needs to find new debtor to take on that debt. And that is driving much of the geopolitical shifts that we're going to be covering in this episode. So when the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer and the economy detach itself from the stock market, you get asset price inflation, and the side effect is consumer price inflation, which means those in debt that aren't holding those assets, their purchasing power decreases and the dollar is devalued, both in terms of purchasing power internally in America, as well as relative to other currencies measured by things like the DXY. And both of those are going down, and there will be more and more fiscal dominance. So of course, they are changing the rules of the game and they are printing stable coins, and stable coins have two-tiered impact. Firstly, you can roll over the debt and back the debt and make the American public the bag holders as more and more foreign countries are swapping in their US government debt and exchanging it for gold. At the same time, America is only able to force people to purchase those dollars in their regional influence. And that is creating an interesting time, particularly with the petrodollar and the Middle East. And so the demand for dollars, which has to perpetually go up, because when you start weakening it, then people are able to sell those dollars, purchase foreign currencies, and they get wealthier. And so with that increase in wealth relative to other currencies, they start buying their local assets. And this is the transition that we are witnessing in real time. Now, during this managed transition that we are experiencing, we get major geopolitical shifts. And so right down from the Bitcoin side, people are protecting themselves with Bitcoin and gold reaching new all-time highs. On the macro side, the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. The economy is detached from the reality of the stock market, and they need to keep rolling it over, which means that you get higher and higher inflation. So 2% inflation is no longer a goal. It's more like 3 to 4%. And remember, this is 3 to 4% on top of a price that the majority of people that don't own assets couldn't afford anyway. So this is driving that internal civil unrest because people are losing faith in the system while they are, filming out a card saying, I can't afford my rent, I can't afford my bills. You're telling me that this is the greatest economy ever. What it means is it's the greatest economy ever for the wealthiest 10% that own 90% of the assets. And so if you don't own assets, then you're in trouble. And so that drives the geopolitical situation, because as you get civil unrest, you recognize that external forces come along and they reset the world order because they are at the end of a debt cycle for the US. They know that their only way to roll over this scheme is to continue to force the demand for the dollars, but the dollar value is going down and people are buying gold, which is creating a speculative attack on the US economy for external forces. So now those that are negotiating with the US, particularly in these tariff wars, they get to use their leverage and they have choice. Because China has risen, people are able to decide, do I want to continue to negotiate with America? But now I've got another choice. And this choice in the East is not telling me how to run my economy. It's not implementing covert regime changes, and it doesn't have a proof of weapons network. So while we use in Bitcoin the proof of work network, in the macro side and the geopolitical side, America and the West collectively are controlled by this proof of weapons network that I've always talked about. It weaponizes technology, it weaponizes finance, and it weaponizes military, as well as weaponizing debt-based consumption. So you have a military industrial complex, a technical industrial complex, a financial industrial complex, and a consumption industrial complex, as long as the debt keeps rolling. As long as you can persuade people to borrow more, as long as you can give more financial weapons of mass destruction to companies which are able to gain access to that cheap debt in the bond market, and then they're able to pump up the price of their stocks, and through the debt markets and the equity markets, they're able to control entrepreneurs. They're able to control the government. So you have this scenario where the government is controlled by lobby of the technical industrial complex, military industrial complex, financial industrial complex, and consumption industrial complex, because you can change all of these habits. And you can change all of these habits by simply changing access to capital and changing the interest rates. Who owns the Federal Reserve that controls the short-term interest rate? The financial industrial complex. The shareholders of the Fed are the banks. And so Jerome Powell is simply a puppet for what the banks want. Trump is simply a puppet for what the banks want because he's funded by the financial industrial complex. And we have this geopolitical situation that we are dealing with now. Now, one of the biggest shifts in the geopolitical situation, I notice my camera's stuck right now. I hope you can still hear me. It looks like the camera is going to keep getting stuck, but we'll keep carrying on anyway. And hopefully the sound's not interfering. But on the geopolitical side, the world is being split up into this multipolar world order. What is the multipolar world order? Well, remember, the collective West is now controlled by this proof of weapons network. And at the top of the financial industrial complex is organizations like JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs and various others. Now they're able to financialize, securitize, and now tokenize everything. And those that are giving their pensions, their endowment funds, their insurance premiums, their ETF, money which invests passively, they've accumulated trillions and trillions of dollars. And so they're able to manage a portfolio, and underneath them, they can get a board seat on every company. So 20,000 companies of these different public companies that have been tokenized, securitized, and financialized, and the dollar is completely created and owned by the banks as debt. And so now this system, this proof of weapons network, is cannibalizing the West and resetting the world order. Because if you remember, things like BRICS, this was an acronym that was created by Goldman Sachs. And Goldman Sachs is looking, BlackRock is sat there with their spreadsheet saying, we've hit a point where the West isn't even having children anymore, demographic issues, there's a pension crisis, and they're having babies over there across Africa, across the Muslim countries, various other ones. And also, what are we going to be able to do about that? Well, we need to reset the world order into a multipolar world order. And we need to install people like Trump who can implement tariff policies and make sure that this facilitates this shift to the East and turns America into a regional technocracy that is the host country of the proof of weapons network because it has the largest and deepest capital markets. And then those capital markets are able to vassalize Australia, Canada, Latin and Central America, the European Union, but it has to retreat from countries that it can no longer exert its covert regime change and deep state operations in order to destabilize countries. Now, never is that more prevalent than what we're witnessing, with the countries that are unifying with China, i.e. SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, that had UAE, that had Egypt, that had Ethiopia, had Indonesia, Saudi join as a observing member, and of course Iran. And so these different allegiances have now been able to de-dollarize and make it where sanctions don't work. And so now they can transact in this multipolar world order, and they can negotiate with other regions like ASEAN, which is the regional blocks between Singapore, Vietnam, Cambodia, and various other regions as well. And they're able to unify with countries in the middle that control the vast resources, like the African global South. And the closer you are to America, unfortunately, you're on the wrong side of the proof of weapons network. But if you're further along into Africa and Asia, then you can unify, right? And you can align with the Gulf countries that control much of, through OPEC, the ability to control oil prices, which is how you reset inflation and determine whether you prop up the petrodollar or you allow for more and more oil to be priced in foreign currencies. And so because they've also accumulated vast sovereign wealth through their partnerships, they've put themselves in a position of power, and the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, have now unified around that. Now, BRICS, ASEAN, GCC have all coordinated on this gradual, slow transition by negotiating with the Proof of Weapons Network. The Proof of Weapons Network controls the collective West, but it is a global investor. So when the Proof of Weapons Network wants to reset the world order, it can use its vast access to bond market and liquid capital markets in order to change things. And so it wants to take as much out of the dollar as it can because it controls the ability to print the dollar as debt. But eventually, the American economy in its debt-based Ponzi scheme would have reached its full utility. And so you need to cannibalize and create civil unrest internally, fund covert operations to drive wedges between, what they call the left versus the right, and even use things like Patriot Act to classify your own people as terrorists, like Antifa. And then you need to deploy military and you need to deploy technology. So across the UK, you get digital IDs. You then get civil unrest campaigns. Right now, we've had, whether this is engineered or whether it's natural and organic, there's two ways that the Proof of Weapons Network can do this. By controlling the media, it's able to enrage people into mental illness where they end up doing things like mass shootings or stabbings. Or they can just do what they've always done around the world, a form of colored revolution, where you essentially manufacture atrocities like they did on October the 7th in order to reset the orders, create people angry. Even Charlie Kirk assassination. I'm not saying that it isn't real. I'm saying that these intelligence agencies, they manufacture the environment of mental illness in order to drive people to these behaviors. And then they use the media in order to manipulate the truth so that people are angrier and angrier. And then they drive them on each other. Or they do what they used to do on the global south, which is colored revolutions. They just simply implant people, dress them up as if they were, Muslims, and then say that the Muslims did this. And you also do things where, you can create, perpetuate Jewish conspiracy theories about ruling the world or whatever, and then use that in order to either actually engage in a covert operation. And I think it's doing it on itself right now. So the tactics of war that propped up the dollar are now cannibalizing and coming home, which is why we're seeing this environment where all of the politicians, whether it be a Macron, whether it be a Starmer, whether it be a Trump, whether it be a Mark Carney, they're just printing money, implementing surveillance policies, and reallocating that money over to US corporate interest in order to drive up the debt-based Ponzi scheme, because they are subservient through this proof of weapons network. And all they need to do is try and pretend they're doing it for the people. So they create narratives around why they're spending so much on military, around these wars. And now what I want to do is I want to drive this understanding of the proof of weapons network and where we are right now into an understanding of the Netanyahu and Trump speech, and why I believe on both sides most people are missing the mark. Now, my analysis is geopolitical and geofinancial analysis based upon my experience of working in the proof of weapons network. I was one of those financial terrorist investment bankers in my early career. I worked in corporate finance. I know how these financial weapons of mass destruction work. I also worked in trading, so you can understand how to manipulate share prices. And I also understood the narratives that are pushed in order to get people to purchase these stocks, like stockbroking. Now, I left to be a monetary reformer, and that was pre-financial crisis. That allowed me to understand the system and teach people the system. And after trying to create a non-fractional reserve bank as a resistance against the proof of weapons network, obviously found Bitcoin, and Bitcoin meant that I started investing in all the companies in the ecosystem. We've been on this 14-year journey of documenting everything on YouTube. And we're now at episode 100 of BitcoinHardTalk in order to help people understand what is actually happening here in these large geopolitical shifts. So with that in mind, I want to now move to the center of the world, what would normally be called West Asia, until via an operation called Sykes-Picot, which was basically to split the Middle East by the French, British, a little bit of Imperial Soviet Union, but also as it transitioned to the American neo-colonizers, it just basically split the Middle East into always having violence, and it used and weaponized World War I and World War II in order to split the territories up and install Israel on top of Palestine. And it would weaponize religious ideologies to recruit an army. It created the terrorism. In fact, for those of you that don't know, let's ask, if you don't believe me, I'm going to try something new today. We're going to ask ChatGPT in real time to see what it says. But in the early days, when essentially, there was negotiations between the Zionists and the Nazi Hitler called the Havara Agreement, you would flood Palestine with Jewish immigrants, which were welcome as Jewish immigrants, because Jews, Christians, and Muslims always used to live in peace with each other. However, they didn't welcome the colonial part of it because it was a settler colonial movement based upon terrorism. And that word terrorism came from these early, what were classified by the British colonizers at the time, Jewish terrorist groups. That doesn't mean all Jews are terrorists, just like if you say Muslim, they say Islamist and all these words as weapons to try and manipulate. It just means there was a group called Haganah and Stern Gang and various other ones that would essentially use terrorism in order to terrorize the Palestinians and take over the land so that they could destabilize the region, and the colonizers would have an outpost where they could make sure that the country never unified around their oil and could compete with the dollar. So after World War II, the dollar became the world reserve currency. We've covered this on many times. The Bretton Woods Agreement was set up that later led to an agreement between Saudi Arabia and America, where they essentially stole 50% of oil in perpetuity revenue on the condition that they priced it in dollars, and then that would create a flow of purchases of US debt that would prop up the dollar, overvalue the dollar, and we entered into this hyper-financialized globalist economy as well that we're talking about today. But eventually the petrodollar was emerged. Now Saudi Arabia slowly over time got back its own country, canceled those agreements, and was able to utilize the petrodollar to build vast sovereign wealth. Now it is a parallel utility to the proof of weapons network. The proof of weapons network wants to actually negotiate with Saudi Arabia and the GCC countries because they've got access to capital. So rewind it back and let's have a look at ChatGPT, see if this works. Could you describe Haganah Group, and were they classified by the British as terrorists? And what did they actually do? And what was Stern Gang and other groups that led to the creation of the kibbutz and various other things?
Absolutely. Let's dive into that. Who was the Haganah? The Haganah was essentially a Jewish paramilitary organization that operated in British Mandatory Palestine from the 1920s until the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. In those years, it was not officially recognized by the British authorities as a legal defense force. It was more or less seen as an underground militia. While the British didn't formally classify the Haganah as a terrorist group in the way we might use that term today, they certainly considered it an illegal armed organization and tried to suppress its activities, especially when those activities involved smuggling weapons or resisting British immigration restrictions. What did the Haganah actually do? In a nutshell, the Haganah's main goal was to defend Jewish communities. They organized local defense units, ran training programs, and eventually coordinated more structured operations to protect settlements and prepare for the end of the British Mandate. They were not always strictly defensive, though. They also carried out some offensive operations, especially as tensions rose in the 1940s. The Stern Gang and other groups. Alongside the Haganah, there were other groups like the Irgun and the Stern Gang, also known as Lay. The Stern Gang was a more radical breakaway faction that took a harder line against British rule and sometimes used more extreme tactics. These groups didn't always agree with the Haganah's approach and often had their own agendas. From militias to kibbutzim, eventually many of the people involved in these defense groups were also part of the broader Zionist movement that founded kibbutzim, collective farming communities. These settlements were a way to establish a strong Jewish presence on the land and build a self-sufficient society. So in a sense, these groups were part of the groundwork for what became the State of Israel's early infrastructure, including those early kibbutz settlements. So there you have it. The Haganah and related groups played a key role in both defense and the founding of communal living projects in the region.
Thank you for that. Was there ever sexual violence used, or did they ever turf Palestinians out of their houses? Was violence a tool that was used?
Absolutely. Let's talk about that aspect of it. Use of violence and forced displacement. It's important to note that the period leading up to and around 1948 was incredibly turbulent and often violent on any sides. The Haganah, as well as the Irgun and the Stern Gang, did sometimes use force to achieve their goals. This included armed confrontations with both British authorities and local Arab communities. As for forced displacement, yes, there were instances during the conflict, especially in 1948, where Palestinian villages were emptied and inhabitants were indeed forced to leave. Some of these events are still heavily debated by historians and remain a very sensitive topic, but there's a general consensus that violence and displacement did occur. This is part of what Palestinians refer to as the Nakba, or catastrophe, which involved a large number of Palestinians becoming refugees. Regarding sexual violence. On the topic of sexual violence, documented cases are more complex and less frequently discussed in mainstream history. But like many conflicts, it's unfortunately likely that some acts of that nature occurred amid the broader violence. Such incidents might not be as well documented or as central in the historical narrative, but conflict zones sadly often see a range of abuses. In summary, yes, violence, including forced displacement, was indeed a tool used during that period. It's a very charged and complex history, and these events still shape a lot of the discussions about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict today.
Okay, so I don't want to just give it from my words. You can have that biased version in terms of imagine the words that they use back, to describe those events. Imagine how they describe October the 7th today. Now, we know if you've watched the documentary from the Grey Zone on my blog, simondixon.com, where I gave some commentary on Atrocity Inc., that there were not sexual violence on October the 7th, and that atrocity propaganda was used. And we broke down who made up the lies, what the evidence was, and they're still using that propaganda in order to perpetuate a negotiation between the proof of weapons network, any resistance movement. And notice how the language is different. They use these words in order to manipulate you, in order to think that the acts that they created are at the proof of weapons network. When somebody resists against them, every accusation is a confession. And so I just wanted to highlight and just use, sources that are typically more biased towards a Western narrative, to be able to just show you that these different things happened. And I've done the study and I've gone through that. So watch the documentary Atrocity Inc. to understand what really happened on October the 7th, because we're reaching where the propaganda on social media, due to the atrocities that are happening around the world, that are either manufactured through intelligence agencies or the proof of weapons network, or through psychological operations to make people crazy and hateful in order to achieve the goals, which is a neo-colonial 1984 Orwellian digital ID, stablecoin, central bank digital currency takeover of the collective West and the rest of the world to compete with these other forces. And so let's bring it all the way back through to today. Now, if you're a long-term listener of Bitcoin Hard Talk, you'll know lots of different stories that have been covered along the way. But let's push forward to where we are. Now, we need to reset the history and look at what is happening today and what are the power dynamics of today. So if you've been a long-term listener, you'll know that we believe that October the 7th, as well as the escalation between Russia and Ukraine, were two games that were set up to reset the chessboard and test. And October the 7th, which I fully believe all the major regional powers that needed to know knew that that was going to happen. And of course, Netanyahu, who mainly represents the interest of the US military industrial complex, pretending that he represents Israel only, which is a colonial outpost for committing crimes against humanity for the military industrial complex and the financial industrial complex, and testing technology for the technical industrial complex. You want to do something completely illegal? You want to beta test your technology, occupation as a service on the West Bank through digital IDs, surveillance, artificial intelligence, massacres, or you want to do genocide as a service through the West Bank, then you can use the Palestinians as a laboratory for that technology, and then create a brochure, sell it around the world, and the successful companies are able to be gobbled up back into the US stock market via Google, via Oracle, via others. And there are little outposts like this, whether it be Taiwan, whether it be Ukraine, whether it be Philippines, whether it be other little nodes on the proof of weapons network in order to set these goals. Now, what happens at a certain point is that they rely upon being propped up by the dollar and the US capital markets. Now, all of these nodes have to change their plan if the world order is being reset based upon the top of the proof of weapons network, asset managers like BlackRock that now have offices in Saudi Arabia and are negotiating with Saudi Arabia and have board members from Saudi Arabia on their board, they're essentially being bought because BlackRock is a public company. And BlackRock, when you look at its shareholders, of course, it's State Street, it's Vanguard, they own shares in each other, it's Morgan Stanley Asset Management, but it is also all of the sovereign wealth funds in the Middle East, and even some China sovereign wealth, or some Singaporean sovereign wealth, or even some Norwegian sovereign wealth. You can put some sovereign wealth in there, and you're basically able to control the proof of weapons network through changes in wealth. And wealth has changed over time. And so you have people that control the networks, i.e. those are the board members or executives that work for these companies. They work for the board. The board is installed by the proof of weapons network through their large shareholding as a result of managing other people's money. But the board works for the shareholders. And so if you own the shares in majority, then these vast sovereign wealth funds are able to change the geopolitical dynamics of the proof of weapons network and realign interest around capital in this fluid network that is really what we are witnessing in the Middle East right now. So I've said that October the 7th was an operation. Benjamin Netanyahu, that primarily also when the Biden administration was in, Biden was a neocon. He represented the vast military industrial complex empire. But when it switched to Trump, it was in recognition that Trump would reset the world order through tariff policies, drive everyone towards BRICS, weaken the dollar, turn America into a regional power, and then focus on technology, artificial intelligence, robotics, energy, and everything that was needed in order to control the neighbors for the proof of weapons network. But he was mainly aligned as a deal maker with the financial industrial complex because Trump was really funded via Elon Musk, a military member of the technical industrial complex, the Bank of New York Mellon family, who was aligned with the financial industrial complex, and then Mariam Edelstein, who represents the Israel first part of the policy, but then Israel is mainly military industrial complex. So you had technology on top, financial second, and the Israel, which is military on the third part of the rung. Now, the proof of weapons network likes to manage a portfolio. And so the financial industrial complex wants to continue to work with the vast energy that is needed for artificial intelligence. And there's not enough energy in the world. And right now, with the drill baby drill strategy, it's made America independent, where it's got its own resources to be a regional power. But at the same time, there is a lot of other people and power plays. And Trump is negotiating these deals. When he's negotiating these deals, you get foreign direct investment. What does foreign direct investment mean? It means that you become a controller. So an owner and controller. You can install your board as a controller, but you can become an owner of the capital. And this was the IMF textbook. The IMF was set up to prop up the dollar and get the world addicted to dollar debt, so it could then destroy countries, change leadership, and then force them onto a dollar standard, ruin their currency through currency debasement, get them to lend money back to the US government, and then that money would be invested in capital that would allow them to control resources. They would privatize, financialize, and securitize. And this was the neo-colonial model of the post-World War II Bretton Woods era. It eventually had to come off gold, and eventually it entered into the full debt-based Ponzi scheme that we operate today. But as I said, this creates the K-shaped economy where the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. That creates civil unrest and tensions, and then that creates an environment where you can do a financial attack on the West. And that is what I believe the GCC is doing. But they are managing their relationship because their largest customer now is not America. America is energy independent. Who's buying all their oil? Well, the largest customer of Iranian oil and Saudi oil, of Qatari natural gas, of course, is China. And China's got the manufacturing base, and it's got the alignment with Iran as well as Saudi Arabia. So China came along and said, right, let's be smarter here. we can slowly create an environment where we can box America into its own regional cage. And so it created BRICS, it created SCO, and GCC was formed. And they started to align strategically around a slow managed transition that would allow them to negotiate with the BlackRocks and the Proof of Weapons Network. Now, Iran historically has been an enemy of Saudi Arabia. They're kind of like, when you see an Iranian resistance movement person debating a Saudi, type of person, it's kind of like Republican, Democrat, left, right, civil unrest. Operation Gladio, if you've read that book, where you manufacture divide and conquer by pushing out these psychological operations and covert operations to make people enemies so that they can't unify, and then you can colonize and take over. Well, that's kind of what's happened here. So you had Saudi that kind of built its way through diplomacy into this relationship with America, and Iran that did resistance. And Iran obviously got sanctioned, and then sanctions means that you have a destroyed economy. A destroyed economy means you try and create a colored revolution by making the environment so bad that people don't want to live there anymore. These are the geopolitical tactics that are used by the Proof of Weapons Network. Now, China came along and said, well, I'm your best customer for everything, and I'd like to build up your economy. I'm not going to tell you how to govern. I'm not going to try and overthrow your leadership, like the IMF and the American empire did. I'm going to allow you to be who you are, but I'd like you to buy some of my products, and we'd like to de-dollarize. I'd like to create this network that exists outside the dollar system. And that has been increasing and increasing and increasing. And central banks have been selling their dollar debt and buying gold. Individuals have been buying Bitcoin, and the Proof of Weapons Network, like BlackRock, is managing through Bitcoin ETFs all of their customers having Bitcoin ready for the upcoming currency war. So when it wants to do the big rug pull, when the dollar is not as useful to it anymore, then it's able to just use America for its capital markets, and all of these, the markets are not used for its people. That's what we're witnessing right now, the cannibalization by the Proof of Weapons Network on its own host nations, the West. That applies to Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Europe, UK, America, and various other things. Right. So now you've got this normalization between Iran and Saudi Arabia. I've always said on Bitcoin Hard Talk, in order to have peace in the Middle East, three things need to happen, and they need to happen simultaneously. You need to normalize between Iran and Saudi Arabia. China did that. And you have noticed that ever since that normalization, although October the 7th happened, I believe that strategically Iran has been stepping back from its funding of resistance and set a game on October the 7th where atrocity propaganda was used by the West. And they tried to conflate any resistance with ISIS and various other groups that the West funds in order to create destabilization campaigns from their wars. Basically, Netanyahu had a choice. Can you ethnically cleanse the Palestinians? So they used all their leverage against Egypt. Egypt was vassalized by the IMF, but the GCC started investing in Egypt. And the China and the Belt and Road Initiative also started helping Egypt in reconstruction projects. So this gave Egypt an option, even though Sisi was installed during Arab Spring for the Proof of Weapons Network. And we had, basically IMF debt that was able to, through currency devaluation, control the economy and destroy the wealth of the people through currency manipulation and currency wars. But Egypt was able to fight back, and Sisi now has other alignments with China, with the GCC. And so they were meant to, after October the 7th, ethnically cleanse the Palestinians so that Israel could have the land through the Greater Israel Project, which is the Greater American Colony Project, to prop up the dollar, destabilize the region, and ensure that the region can never align. But China created the resistance against it. Iran created the resistance against it. And by normalizing Iran and Saudi Arabia, Saudi and the GCC were able to push on the US relationship fight back and negotiate with the proof of weapons network by aligning to the east. And then the proof of weapons network had this shift. Now, because Egypt did not open the borders and ethnically cleanse the Palestinian, which would have led to war in the Sinai Desert with Egypt, the forever war model, the continuation of the previous model, this meant that the faction that wants to work on deal making and rebuilding the Middle East and the financial industrial complex entered into a negotiation. At this point, I believe that we had this two-tiered strategy: resistance through Iran factions, and then obviously we had the 12-day war and all the theaters that we covered. You can look at previous episodes to find out what happened there. And I believe that was a managed transition to give all of the different factions the narrative they needed. Israel got to say, we took out the hardlining members of the IRGC, that essentially they needed to go because they wouldn't be on board the plan. Iran got to say, we decimated Israel because this is the first time they were able to strike Israel without a major war escalation like the Iraq War. Now, America then said, we took out the nuclear program and we took down the threat. Everybody got to say, we were strong, we won, even though the full story was, I believe, a collective operation. Just like we saw recently with strikes on Qatar. This meant that the Hamas political wing exited Qatar and it moved to the next phase, where essentially Saudi, with its partnership with France, was buying the Western European colonizers out because their economy has been put in severe distress. Who put them in distress? It was the proof of weapons network via Ukraine. It escalated the war in order to destroy the manufacturing base of Germany, remove access via the blowing up of Nord Stream pipeline for cheap gas, and vassalize Europe into the proof of weapons network. The proof of weapons network, like BlackRock, Blackstone, KKR, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, they're buying up all the European assets. They're also doing destabilization campaigns by weaponizing immigration. And then that creates all the different narratives that lead to violence that allow them to buy the assets cheaper. The Gulf countries decided to also buy those assets in their sovereign wealth funds. And so now the GCC, led by Saudi Arabia, is able to tell the Europeans, hey, the French, hey, the English, hey, Portugal, we'll do deals with you. We'll do Qatar investment, UAE investment, Saudi investment, but you need to recognize Palestine. Because in order to get to the next phase, what is the second part? The second part, the first part is normalization between Saudi Arabia and Iran. The second part is a resolution to the Palestinian cause. So now virtually all of the world, with the exception of Israel, America, and a few nodes of the proof of the American empire, have recognized Palestine as a state. And now we enter into the next phase, which is the plan that we're about to play, the Trump and Netanyahu. Now, this plan wasn't Trump's plan. It is being repackaged as Trump's plan, but it was actually an Arab plan that was put forward 20 years ago. It's identical in almost every way, but they didn't have the leverage in order to force it through. And so the military-industrial complex used Israel in order to fund the forever war money, because at the time, America wasn't energy independent. Now it is energy independent. It created fracking. And so it is no longer able to pull on those strings. And so the military model is dying, and there is need for the Middle East in this whole artificial intelligence data center Orwellian nightmare that's being created. And so GCC are able to pull those strings, negotiate with BlackRock, buy BlackRock and all of the different sovereign wealth funds, and exert its influence to reset the chessboard so that now, finally, we can have the old plan revived. Trump gets to say it was his plan, even though it was China normalization and the GCC plan. But that gets to save face for the America, while it eventually turns Israel into another toxic asset, just like the rest of the West. So that, you have all these deal making that's being done. Palestine essentially, and Israel and Lebanon and all the different regions will collectively be put into the Levant, and the Levant will be liberated, but under the power dynamics of the world today. The proof of weapons network investing in rebuild and the GCC doing the investments. So they get the contracts as a negotiation of the exit, but the GCC want control over that process and money. And now they, ever since October the 7th, have been negotiating. And what has the proof of weapons network been using as its leverage? The genocide and the ethnic cleansing and the genocide of the Palestinians. They even entered into the final parts of the negotiation, a starvation and famine campaign, so that it could force GCC to give concessions while Iran steps back and continues making those routes with China and Russia. So essentially, the Ukraine was a node to destabilize Europe, and then GCC and the proof of weapons network could buy up all the assets and then exert leverage in order to reset the world order. You had different types of nodes, which, like USAID, which pushes out media propaganda. Like Israel is now paying $7,000 per tweet to influencers in order to push the Zionist type of old talking points. But also people like Tucker Carlson and Candace Owen were allowed to de-radicalize evangelical Christians that have been told lies about confusion around their religion, believing that Israel, the politics, needs to be protected when it was a prophet. And then you have all of these different ideologies. And even through this network, it created the 9/11 operation. It created all the different wars. And that was the old model. But it created these radicalization and weaponization of the different Muslim parts. So it used the Christian religion, the Muslim religion, and the Jewish religion in order to create these radical factions. And then they could push out narratives that would justify war and recruit the people that needed to do the violence. And these are the types of psyops that they're willing to play. Now they need to do the de-radicalization process so that we can move to the next environment of stability and rebuild. And they want as much leverage as possible. So they use starvation campaigns, famine, October the 7th, and all the other types of psychological operations that they've used around the world all this time through their deep state and covert operations. Okay, so we have this power struggle. Now, what is the third part? So the first part is normalization between Iran and Saudi Arabia. The second part is a resolution to the Palestinian cause. And the third part is a retreat from US military bases so that they can be more and more controlled by the GCC. So if America is no longer needed to destabilize the region, Israel becomes a toxic asset, and these military bases over time are no longer useful for destabilization campaigns because they're not there to prop up the dollar anymore, because America is a regional power and the proof of weapons network is reset in the chessboard. All three of those are happening right now, which is why I believe that while the most of the world is looking at all the things that have happened in the past as their paradigm for analyzing rather than following the money, and I don't believe the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians is going to happen, despite the humanitarian, disgusting crisis that the dollar is backed by. And by the way, what we're witnessing in Palestine is only you being able to see what has always happened to back up the dollar. There has always been these types of operations, and the dollar is backed by genocide. Sorry if my screen is stuck throughout this. Hopefully the sound's all coming through. Now, with that all in mind, we're going to now analyze what actually happened through the context of the proof of weapons network and these three changes: the American retreat into the regional power, the resolution to the Palestinian cause based upon current power dynamics, and what the normalization between these regional blocks actually means, so that when we can see something like Netanyahu and Trump giving a speech, we can retranslate it through this context. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump into the speech, and I'm going to break it into a few different sections, and I'll take some notes as I go through, and then we'll write down and we'll retranslate it from the follow the money proof of weapons network perspective so that we can make some predictions about what comes next. And at the end of this, we'll dive a little bit deeper into the 20-point plan, with a little summary that we created. And then finally, how you protect yourself in the current environment. And then we'll end it up just like we did last week. So Azad, if we could start with the first section of the Trump and Netanyahu speech and why, and we'll jump in with a bit of analysis after a while. Okay, I'll do that. So, Azad's jumping in right now because the algorithms of people will misquote. Anyway, I believe that everybody that works for the traditional financial system, whether they know it or not, uses financial weapons of mass destruction, and the proof of weapons network creates these tools. And these people inadvertently don't even know what they're doing, but they are financial terrorists. And so when I worked for the proof of weapons network at the time when I thought it was just a career, I had no idea. I was just a cog in the wheel. I was either a broker, then I was a trader, then I was working in corporate finance, taking companies public. But essentially, it's the word that I use to describe anybody that works in the traditional proof of weapons network, because they're just cogs in the wheel. They're not the top of the power structure. And so the activities I later learned when I understood my form of analysis, what that actually meant. And so a financial terrorist is essentially somebody that uses financial weapons of mass destruction inadvertently, or they're at the top of the chain and they know what they're doing in order to prop up the proof of weapons network and the existing power structure. So Azad, with that clarification, let's jump into the Trump and Netanyahu speech.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States and the Prime Minister of the State of Israel.
Thank you very much, everybody. So this is a big, big day, a beautiful day, potentially one of the great days ever in civilization. Things that have been going on for hundreds of years and thousands of years. At least we're at a minimum very, very close, and I think we're beyond very close. And I want to thank Bibi for really getting in there and doing a job. We've worked well together, as we have with many other countries, both of us, with many other countries, which is the only way this whole situation gets solved. And I'm not just talking about Gaza. Gaza is one thing, but we're talking about much beyond Gaza. The whole deal, everything getting solved. It's called peace in the Middle East. So today is a historic day for peace, and Prime Minister Netanyahu and I have just concluded an important meeting on many vital issues, including Iran, trade, the expansion of the Abraham Accords, and most importantly, we discussed how to end the war in Gaza, but it's just a part of the bigger picture, which is peace in the Middle East, and let's call it eternal peace in the Middle East. So this is far more than anybody expected, but the level of support that I've had from the nations in the Middle East and surrounding Israel and neighbors of Israel has been incredible, incredible. Every single one of them. This afternoon, after extensive consultation with our friends and partners throughout the region, I'm formally releasing our principles for peace, which people have really liked, I must say. And these are done not just routinely done, these are done with total consideration and working with the nations that we're talking about. All of these nations have made contributions to those suggestions. I want to thank the leaders of many Arab and Muslim nations for their tremendous support in developing the proposal, along with many of our allies in Europe. Europe has been very much involved, and as I was called by many of the European leaders, most of them saying, is this true? Are you really doing peace in the Middle East? This is the most incredible thing we've heard. Some think it's the biggest thing they've ever heard. They called just to find out, was it just a rumor or is it actually done? And then they said, have you spoken to the Arab leaders? Have you spoken to all of the other leaders that we have to get? A lot of people involved in this one. I also want to thank Prime Minister Netanyahu for agreeing to the plan and for trusting that if we work together, we can bring an end to the death and destruction that we've seen for so many years, decades, even centuries, and begin a new chapter of security, peace, and prosperity for the entire region. And I want to just say that my meetings and dialogue that we had with so many countries, Saudi Arabia as an example, the king is a phenomenal person. The Emir of Qatar, he's an incredible people. UAE, and that's MBZ and ABZ. We're totally involved. These are the people that we've been dealing with and who've been actually very much involved in this negotiation, giving us ideas, things they can live with, things they can't live with. Pretty complex. I mean, after 2,000, 3,000 years, whatever it is, I guess it's got to be a little complex, or it would have been done a long time ago. The King of Jordan was with us, as you know, in the United Nations. The President of Turkey, President Erdogan, is a friend of mine, a strong man, but a good man. President of Indonesia, somebody who's an amazing leader, Prabowo. He is an amazing leader and respected by everybody. He was in the room with us. We were together with most of these people that I'm mentioning. Others were by phone or the next day. The Prime Minister and the Field Marshal of Pakistan, they were with us right from the beginning. Incredible. In fact, they just put out a statement that they fully believe in this pact. It just came out just as I was walking around. They said, sir, you have a big notice from the Prime Minister of Pakistan and from the Field Marshal that they back this 100%. President El-Sisi of Egypt, who's terrific. And these are people I've gotten to know over the years. I mean, I would say it started around 2015 and then went into 2016 when the presidency officially began. But I've known him actually for a long time, and there are many cases really great men. I can't say in all cases, but I will tell you in many cases they're great men and some great women too. They tend to be mostly men, however, I will say that. But if accepted by Hamas, this proposal calls for the release of all.
Okay, I just want to pause there. Right, I want to cover a few points of understanding. Now, obviously, Zionists, historically, because it is a US colony that does all the illegal activities of the American empire and the proof of weapons network that vassalizes and controls, this over the decades has been through a radicalization process. So you have essentially a network that was set up to prop up the dollar and print money and takes taxpayers' money and printed money and send it over to corporate interest. And if you put Israel in the middle, essentially you can print money, create a narrative that makes the Americans think that this is for their national security. You can send it over to Israel, and then Israel would spend it back into US corporations. And you could do all your covert operations and illegal activities from Israel. Now, when you want to have plausible deniability, you can essentially say that we only did that because there was this AIPAC lobby. Now, the AIPAC lobby is powerful, but it's not as powerful as the financial lobby, the military lobby, the pharmaceutical lobby, and various other lobby groups. And so when you have AIPAC is able to raise more money in America from evangelical Christians and Jewish Zionists within America. And so the more powerful they look, the more they're able to raise. And so this works in AIPAC's favor, and it has made them into a pretty powerful lobby. And you can read books like the Israel Lobby. Now, this narrative was never able to get mainstream, but now it's been made mainstream because there is, I believe, a faction of the proof of weapons network, mainly led by the financial industrial complex, that is managing a divorce process and a de-radicalization process from this false narrative. And so if you can say that Israel rules America, which many people believe, but actually it's a very small economy, and most of the companies end up gobbled up into the large US stock market companies anyway. They get to take clips and steal money at the expense of the Americans. But if Americans actually understood how their system worked, which is basically a K-shaped economy where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, you leave the debt with the average American because they pay through inflation. And then those money is used in order to prop up assets. And eventually the ruling class, the rich and wealthy, control the government through lobby, control the amount of money that's printed through the Federal Reserve. And they get to just through this elaborate scheme end up with all the assets. Now, if people knew that's how the American economy was structured with the Federal Reserve Act, then obviously that's a very unpopular message. But if you can say that, oh, it was the blackmail of Israel, it was Israel that assassinated JFK. Now, you can get Mossad to do that, and that would be part of the deep state, but it's for corporate interests. And so if you need to put a bomb in Israel, and you need to assassinate a president that wants peace, then you can do that via Mossad or the deep state, and the FBI, CIA, and Mossad are all part of the same network that sit under the military and financial industrial complex of the proof of weapons network. But you get this plausible deniability. So the relationship between Israel and America has always been very important. They've also built factions of power via this, and it is a faction of power. But their economy and their wealth, there's 3,000 billionaires that we know about, and 300 of them are Jewish, and many of them would contribute to AIPAC. But 90% isn't Jewish, and the world order is changing. Remember how the proof of weapons network works? You can change it by purchase of BlackRock and various other important nodes in the proof of weapons network. And so the GCC money has been doing this over time because of its diplomatic process. At the same time, Iran has been doing the resistance, and eventually the combination of resistance plus diplomacy has entered into this new vision for the region that we're witnessing right now. Now, Trump has a job. He essentially works for the interest of BRICS. Why? Because he works for the financial industrial complex who wants a multipolar world order and is aligned with this slow capital outflows, weakening of the dollar, turning America into regional, and then just using it for its AI data center, capital markets, and the ability to use the dollar to engage in financial weapons of mass destruction to acquire assets on the cheap and manipulate markets. Now, eventually, that dollar is no longer going to work through this managed transition. And so this, so Trump essentially represents that interest. But there is a massive faction of power, the evangelical Christians that have been radicalized into this ideology, and obviously the Jews that reside in America that are always Israel first. And so you've got those Christian and you've got those Jews radicalization process. And obviously through the fake war on terror, you created a fake perception of Islam that most Americans have been radicalized into through operations like 9/11 and all the funding of ISIS, Al-Qaeda through USAID, and all of the different wars and the narratives that have been pushed out to people. And so think of them as one network. And so Israel and America go as one together. So Trump always on the public facing needs to look like he works with Israel. And please don't confuse this with Trump derangement syndrome or Q trust the plan, because Trump is just a node in the network. His job is to get rich. He is owned by the GCC as well. Why? Because his son, Hari Krishna, has a fund called Infinity Fund, which is funded by Saudi Arabia. So remember, most people think, for some reason, people in America are able to put together that when AIPAC does it, it means they control everything. But when the GCC do it, they think that they're just owned by Zionists and they're handing over money. No, the same rules apply. And so Saudi Arabia, through this, not through the network of an actual lobby within America, they have to be registered as foreign agents. But through these networks, they're able to do investment deals with Trump and essentially buy the Trump administration's policy, which is what we're seeing right now. Who else does Saudi Arabia own? Well, they were negotiating between the JP Morgan stooge, Tony Blair, and the Saudi Arabian contractor. So Saudi and the GCC own Tony Blair. And so what you're seeing right now is things that are acceptable under a MAGA narrative for those that think Israel rules the world, so that they can then continue this process and manage this transition of the vassalization of Israel and Saudi being able to get the Arab plan, expel America from the region, have a Palestinian state, and by the European leaders. And so all of the different players that Trump was talking about were previously owned by the Proof of Weapons Network via the IMF, but now have power with Trump, BRICS, GCC, Saudi, and the different regions. Now, within the GCC, they have good cop, bad cop. UAE is good cop. They always say, you know, all of the narrative that the West needs to hear to make them look like they are Zionist, Muslim Zionists as well. Saudi is a bit more of the bad cop, but also there's a lot of brainwashing where they say when Israel controls the process, they control and rule the world, because they've got the Jewish conspiracy that if you look at my blog, simondixon.com, where I went, Do Jews Rule the World? I went through the data and showed that actually power changes. It's dynamic. It is a very powerful faction, but it is smaller than other powerful factions. And you can go through the data on that blog post. But anyway, when Saudi do it and the GCC do it, they say, oh, they're doing it because they're Zionist control. So this is victims of propaganda when they can't see the power dynamics change and the world is changing, because in America, they've kind of been radicalized into either one of the two factions, you know, the anti-Jew ideology and the anti-Islam ideology, which is hilarious because historically, under, for example, the golden age of Islam, you know, Jews were better off under Islamic rule than under Christian rules. You had the Nazi regime, you had all of the persecutions, you had all of the different things over time in the history between Europe and historically, you know, Jewish hatred that comes from that culture. But they, in this Judeo-Christian radicalization narrative, they managed to make it look like Islam was the enemy and Islam was a radical, even though it was a religion about religious tolerance and religious freedom. And anyone that studies history can look into the the European, much of the European free market economics and various other things, mathematics. It came from that golden age of Islam when Europe was in the dark ages, but then it repackaged much of that culture. And, you know, it was because both Jewish culture and Islamic culture have a real focus on literature and study. And so that created, you know, this environment, and then that was repackaged into Europe, and then they called it capitalism and various other things. Topic for another day, the different types of economic thoughts pre, you know, Adam Smith and the Wealth of Nations and various other things. We'll cover that one another time. But the point is, anyway, I've gone off on a bit of a tangent. The point is here is that America needs to always maintain that face of Israel rules the world, you know, that Israel-American relationship is great, while the covert operation happens in the background that essentially vassalizes all of these regions into the GCC rule because of this dynamic that I think we're witnessing right now, which is why I do actually take this plan seriously. And of course, it's not a Trump plan. Trump gets to, you know, he was installed in order to get rich, push the BRICS GCC while looking like everything is about Israel ruling the world and the Greater Israel Project. He was the perfect guy to do that. He could reset the world order through tariffs, and he, was able to do all this deal making, which essentially allowed for the foreign direct investment that has reset this world order and push a nationalist narrative in order to shrink America into a regional power, but also focus on energy and artificial intelligence and technology and print loads of money into fiscal dominance, which would push the stock market to new all-time highs. He gets to say new all-time high stock market while the economy goes across further. He also could implement the crypto policy and make it look like it's not a surveillance state, while all it is stable coins and all of the other 1984 Orwellian nightmare. So Trump was perfect for that, and he's doing everything that he needs to do. Now, obviously, he says Abraham because he needs to align with this Judeo-Christian American ideology while he's doing these deals on the side. But at the same time, he needs to recognize the power structure. And when he says we're working with the Europeans, he essentially means the Europeans have been vassalized into the GCC and the proof of weapons network. Israel is going in that direction because its economy is being destroyed. Its debt to GDP is going up, but its stock market is still going up, which means because that's a part of the proof of weapons network as well. So the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and you get civil unrest. And eventually you can turn that into a destabilization campaign, overthrow of the cabinet. And the reason that I think what the outstanding issue that's being negotiated right now is Netanyahu is using his leverage because he wants to stay, but it doesn't make sense for that. And I think other factions of power, like the GCC, are saying Netanyahu has to go. And as part of the de-radicalization narrative, overthrow of the cabinet. And I think we'll be witnessing that. Now, we may see more tick for tack, like the Iran 12-day war, in order to get there. We may get more theaters just like that, but directionally, we're all moving in this direction when you follow the money. Okay, so all of that to say that that preamble was to recognize the factions of power, the GCC, European Union, which is now recognizing Palestine, and maintain Israel is our allegiance and negotiate the deals for the proof of weapons network that controls, or essentially Trump works for. Now, Trump is doing all of these deals in the background. He's getting his Trump Towers built. And what the plan that you're about to see right now is a theater. The theater is pretending that Hamas isn't going to release the hostages when there's already been multiple deals for that. Let me do a little thing here. Come on, ChatGPT. Since the 7th of October, have Hamas agreed to any deals? And do some people in Israel believe, or a large faction of the protests in Israel believe, that Netanyahu is more interested in using the war rather than releasing the hostages? And how many times did Hamas agree to a deal since October the 7th? And who sabotaged that deal?
Sure. Here's the rundown. Since October 7th, there have been a few ceasefire deals that Hamas has agreed to, notably one around January 2025, which included phases for hostage releases. But these deals often got shaky or fell apart, with each side blaming the other for breaking terms. And yes, there have definitely been protests in Israel where a lot of people feel that Netanyahu is more interested in continuing the war than in making the release of hostages his top priority. For example, back in September 2024, there were big demonstrations after several hostages were found dead, with protesters accusing him of dragging out the conflict. So there's a mix of politics and public frustration in the air over how these deals have been handled.
And how many deals did Hamas agree to? How many times?
So to sum it up, since October 7th, Hamas has agreed to a few ceasefire deals. For example, there was a notable truce in November 2023 where hostages were exchanged, and another big attempt in May 2024. So far, it's happened a handful of times, but each deal had its own complications.
Okay. All right. Well, there's a lot more to that. Obviously, that's the version that AI is willing to give you, given that it is a tool of the proof of weapons network as well. Right. So that's all the different players. That's the reinterpretation of what we're seeing. And it is only, and I say only, not because I believe Netanyahu, not because I believe Trump. Trump's obviously got a promise that he'll be able to get Abraham Accords, trying to say it in alignment with Israel. And he'll get the Nobel Peace Prize, even though he's probably just reading the plan right now because it had nothing to do with him. It was originally a 21-point plan. It became a 20-point plan. We'll go through that now. And obviously the narrative has always been they could have ended this at any time. Are you telling me that the vast intelligence network in one of the most surveilled states in the world that has had every type of surveillance state and an illegal occupation doesn't know how to get those hostages? Of course They know how to get those hostages. But that's always been the narrative, and they've been paying influencers on social media to confuse people, and through control of media, painting a one-side narrative. It's only once this is starting to come to an end that factions of power start to tell the truth about what has actually happened here. Okay, so let's move into the next section of the speech.
More than 72 hours. So the hostages are coming back, and I hate even saying this from the standpoint, doesn't sound right, but it is so important to the parents. The bodies of the young men, I believe in almost all cases, the young men are coming back immediately. I met with parents. The parents felt as strongly about getting the body of their dead boy back as they did as though the boy were alive and well. It's so important to them. And it means the immediate end to the war itself, not just Gaza. It's the war itself. Under the plan, Arab and Muslim countries have committed, and in writing in many cases, but I actually would take their word for it. The people I mentioned, I'd take their word for it, to demilitarize Gaza, and that's quickly. Decommission the military capabilities of Hamas and all other terror organizations. Do that immediately. And we're relying on the countries that I named and others to deal with Hamas. And I'm hearing that Hamas wants to get this done too, and that's a good thing. And destroy all terror infrastructure, including the tunnels, weapons, production facilities. They have a lot of production facilities that we're destroying. They'll also help train local police forces in the areas that we're discussing right now, in particular in and around Gaza. Working with the new transitional authority in Gaza, all parties will agree on a timeline for Israeli forces to withdraw in phases. They'll be withdrawing in phases. No more shooting, hopefully, as progress is made toward achieving these goals. Arab and Muslim nations need to be allowed the chance to fulfill these commitments of dealing with Hamas. They have to deal with them because they were the one group that we have not dealt with. I haven't dealt with them. But the Arab countries are going to, and Muslim countries are going to be dealing with Hamas, and I believe they've already been there. I think they probably have an understanding, and they haven't maybe mentioned that, but I would imagine they do, otherwise they wouldn't have gone as far as they've gone. If they're unable to do so, then Israel would have the absolute right, and actually our full backing, the U.S. full backing. Marco's here, and a lot of our leaders are here, our great Vice President, Susie Wiles, Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner. They've been so involved in this process. I don't think anybody else could have done it or even come close, but it's we're right there. We're right there. First time in thousands of years, I think you can probably say, if you really look into it, if you study back, if you're a scholar, you would say thousands of years. Israel would have my full backing to finish the job of destroying the threat of Hamas. But I hope that we're going to.
I just want to cover briefly here a couple of those names, and we'll go straight back in. Obviously, the usual Hamas rhetoric that needs to be said is just the narrative that explains the fact that essentially this was always an operation in order to absolutely destroy Gaza, do what America has always done and Britain has always done to back up the dollar and the pound, which is commit genocides, ethnic cleansing, and prop up its currency through these operations. And they always need the antagonist, whether it be Putin, whether it be communism, whether it be China, whether it be Iran, whether it be Hamas, Hezbollah, whatever. They'll always weaponize the narrative in order to do that. But he mentioned a few names. One is Steve Witkoff, who's the envoy for the Middle East. Now, Steve Witkoff and Trump have constructed a company called World Liberty Financial. World Liberty Financial is issuing stable coins. And those stable coins essentially allow the Trump family, Steve Witkoff's son, and Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump and other shareholders of World Liberty Financial to benefit from the US government debt interest, because all stable coins are backed by government debt. And so what Trump and World Liberty Financial have been doing is Trump's been negotiating a deal, for example, the investment of the Abu Dhabi Sovereign Wealth Fund to invest in Binance. And so he would do a $2 billion deal, and he would issue the stablecoin, $2 billion, and then back it by treasuries. And the Trump family and World Liberty Financial get access to $60 million of interest on the back of the US debt, and is able to negotiate these deals that push capital easily when we transition to a stablecoin standard from America over to the Middle East in these tax neutral jurisdictions. And so this supports the capital flow of the proof of weapons network. And he gets to become a player there. Steve Witkoff was negotiating as envoy to the Middle East. And whenever you saw visits to Saudi, to Qatar or UAE, you always had all of the AI people, all of the Larry Finks and BlackRocks, all of the Citi groups, all of the JP Morgan people. So all of the constructs of the technical industrial complex and the financial industrial complex, and a few node operators from the military as well, because they essentially are negotiating the exit. And so all of these deals are being done, and they're weaponizing the dollar. Always weaponizes genocide, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity, pretending that it's doing it to save the region. And obviously it's all narrative control. The other person he mentioned was Harry Kushner. Harry Kushner has a fund. That fund is with Saudi money. And so this is where essentially Saudi gets to exert influence over the Trump family, and they get to lend money. Some of that money comes from the largest banks in China, like ICBC. And then they're able to invest in these Trump towers and these various other things. So this is essentially buying policy so that Trump can profit from this managed transition of an exit from the Middle East. I'll do a few more deals as they come up, as they mention names. But what most people do is they say, this is evidence of Zionist control. No. Israel was a node, and if America and the GCC go together, plus backed by China in the middle, without Israel, then Israel becomes a toxic asset, and the GCC will be buying those toxic assets and slowly gaining more and more control, as it will with the entire Levant. And that's the purpose. One of the most important things. Don't think about who are the people working. Don't think about who are the operators. Don't think about who are the controllers. It's the owners that matter. And so when analyzing this plan, if the GCC is the predominant investor with some proof of weapons network contractors, then the proof of weapons network gets to manage that transition through foreign direct investment, profit from it. But the people that are really in charge is the one that is making the investment and owns the capital. That's the bit that people miss out. And people get that narrative wrong. That's essentially why they say Israel controls different factions. But that money always goes back into American power as well through the stock market. So it's a very sophisticated scheme. But once you follow the money, you can understand how the proof of weapons network works. Let's jump back into the speech.
Hamas rejects the deal, which is always possible. They're the only one left. Everyone else has accepted it. But I have a feeling that we're going to have a positive answer. But if not, as you know, Bibi, you'd have our full backing to do what you would have to do. Everyone understands that the ultimate result must be the elimination of any danger posed in the region. And that danger is caused by Hamas. The tyranny of terror has to end, and this is, again, something that we're looking for. This is eternity. This is for forever. To ensure the success of this effort, my plan calls for the creation of a new international oversight body, the Board of Peace, we call it, the Board of Peace, sort of a beautiful name, the Board of Peace, which will be headed, not at my request, believe me, I'm very busy, but we have to make sure this works. The leaders of the Arab world and Israel and everybody involved asked me to do this, so it would be headed by a gentleman known as President Donald J. Trump of the United States. That's what I want, is some extra work to do, but it's so important that I'm willing to do it, and we'll do it right, and we're going to put leaders from other countries on, and leaders that are very distinguished leaders, and we'll have a board, and one of the people that wants to be on the board is the UK former Prime Minister, Tony Blair, good man, very good man, and some others, and they'll be named over the next few days.
Okay, so remember these names. So most people, obviously, Tony Blair, disgusting node operator for the proof of weapons network that essentially was essential for siphoning off Bank of England printed money, purchasing dollars and making sure that it went to Lockheed Martin, General Dynamic, Raytheon, and just basically propping up the dollar through this, Anglo-Pacific relationship, basically the same relationship that did the transatlantic slave trade when the British were in charge, and built America on slavery and built Britain after doing all these expeditions, like opium wars in China and destroying currencies in Africa to steal resources, taking over tea fields in India. This is normal behavior to back up the pound, back up the dollar, and then the pound transitioned to the dollar. The dollar took over. And obviously, as everything went digital, these are now the neo-colonial tactics that are now in retreat as the world order changes to this multipolar world order. But Tony Blair, obviously, was an ex-US, UK prime minister, was around for the Iraq war, absolutely hated. But then he monetized like crazy by working for JP Morgan, would turn up to the office for a few hours, but his job was to use his relationships in the Middle East with the Gulf countries in order to broker these financial industrial complex deals, with military industrial complex contracts with the Gulf nations. And so what is Tony Blair? What is Trump? If they're the chairman and they're on top, that means they are the employees of the structure. So they work, and who have they historically worked well for? The GCC. And so this is GCC exerting that the controllers are aligned, but obviously they have their financial industrial complex interests. So Trump and Blair are both more financial than military today because of their JP Morgan because of Blair's JP Morgan background. So that tells me that the financial industrial complex is putting together this plan, and the plan is the GCC, and the backers is going to be the GCC, which means this is effectively a US retreat from the region and the negotiation of what you need to pay in order to get rid of the Western colonizers and pay off all the parties to work for you when they pretend that they're working for Western interests. But really what they're doing is they're stealing money from the Brits, the Europeans, and the Americans, and laundering it through to the corporate structure of the proof of weapons network that is getting more and more consolidated power. And obviously they're launching technical weapons of mass destruction in order to control the population that is moving to ever more authoritarianism. And immigration and border control was the perfect way of doing that. Flood the country with immigrants because of all the wars, create economic destruction globally. Therefore, that creates crime. This comes through the borders. And then you control the narratives, close the border. Then you create civil unrest, mass arrests. You create the privatized prison industry through other proof of weapons network members like Core Civic and GEO Group that profits from every deportation and profits from every incarceration. And so the more violence, the better through these private prisons. And you're seeing that Trump is delivering that to perfection. UK is getting worse. Europe is getting worse. And they're monetizing through this proof of weapons network as well. So all of that is happening and being delivered. Tony Blair on the front surface just sounds like a disgusting person to do the plan, which it absolutely is. Now, remember, what I want you to say is I'm not advocating for any of this. Do not confuse advocacy for analyzing what I think is happening based upon my geopolitical and geofinancial experience. And that is different. When I put my humanitarian hat on, I would be talking very, very differently, because I am disgusted by what we have had to witness. And this is what it helps people identify what backs the dollar, because this genocide is what backs the dollar. And any attempt to remove the dollar as world reserve currency, turn America into a regional power, may sound like doomerism if you're a Westerner, but it's actually very good if you're part of the global South. Resetting the world order, leading to currency changes and a multipolar world order is actually competition which is good for the world. So I'm very bullish on where this actually goes, and it's only by following the money. I would be ultra skeptical of this plan. I would believe it's all a trick, and there may be some more trickery because, you know, I believe Netanyahu has to go, the GCC one, and he's trying to stay maybe and protect his own back, and that's leading to these additional games that need to be played. But those are the additional players. Let's carry on with the video.
Working, everybody wants to be on it now. I don't know if that had anything to do. They named me and everybody else wanted to be on it. I guess they figure, well, he's a soft touch. He'll be easy to deal with. Working with the World Bank and others, it will be responsible for recruiting and training a new government that will be made up of Palestinians along with highly qualified experts from all around the world. Hamas and other terrorist factions will play no role in the board, but they'll play no role in the governance of Gaza at all, directly or indirectly. As you know, thousands of Hamas leaders have been killed and soldiers have been killed. And we can never forget October 7th, but thousands have paid the price for that. And now it's time to get our hostages back and get back to trying to build something that's really great and very important. In our meeting today, Prime Minister Netanyahu was very clear.
Of course, he's got to say that, but let me just interrupt and then we'll go straight back. But obviously, if you've seen any of the stats, this is going to be an absolute crime against humanity. There is a Holocaust. The organization that convicted the Holocaust was the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, a Swiss company funded by US interests and executed by Israel, where they've been killing 100 Palestinians a day while they're starving and queuing up for food. The latest stats by Trump's admission, the population of Gaza used to be 2.3 million. He said in his original speech, where he said he's going to take over Gaza, that there's 1.7 million Palestinians. That's 600,000 missing. The stats of 66,000, we know, gross underestimate. This is going to be when the history books are written and people get the real history of the dollar in America that we're documenting in real time. This is going to be a Holocaust-style event, and the truth is going to come out. But even the statistics right now say 80% of the deaths are Palestinian civilians, whether that be children, women, one of the most densely populated from women, children. United Nations have said that it is a genocide. The highest court in the world has said this is a plausible genocide. And obviously we won't get the actual confirmation until it is too late. And sadly, the way the system works and power dynamics work is we need to end the genocide now, which is why I support making sure that this plan happens. If you're a Palestinian, you need the starvation campaign to end. And that's why they leveraged it. But I want you to understand how evil the backing of the dollar is and how BS everything you've been told and all the history that you're lying to. We're going to continue to document the truth and reality, and you're going to have to relearn your history because everything was a lie. And that's what people are discovering right now. Everything is a lie, including every single word that is coming out of Trump's mouth right now. But he's not the top of the chain. These are middle management. Netanyahu is a middle management. Trump, middle management. Yes, they have certain power to exert executive orders, but they work for higher power structures. And that's what the proof of weapons network is. And that's what people need to understand. But anyway, The crimes against humanity are a lot worse. And of course, they always just focus on the hostages. That's the narrative you need. Everybody's figured out the truth. Everybody knows that that's not reality, but they want you to focus on that. Let's go back to the speech.
To a Palestinian state. And he continuously mentions October 7th, and I understand that. Most people do. And I understand and respect his position on many things, but what he's doing today is so good for Israel. I notice that they have large crowds gathering in Israel all the time, and they have my name up. They like me for whatever reason, maybe I don't know, but they do like me. But they say two things. Please get the hostages back and please end the war. They've had it. It's had it. So I think it's a very popular thing you do because he's a warrior. He doesn't know about getting back to a normal way of life, but he is a warrior, and Israel's lucky to have him. But now the people want to get back to peace. They want to get back to normalization in a true sense. Several countries have foolishly recognized the Palestinian state. As you know, some of our European friends, allies, good people, but they're really, I think, doing that because they're very tired of what's going on for so many decades. They've been presidents and prime ministers for years, and during this time, having to do with the Middle East, all they're doing is talking about the same thing over and over. They want to see it get back. And nobody wants that more than me, or I believe Bibi too. But the people of Israel want it. They really want it. They want the hostages back. That includes the probably 32 bodies that we're talking about, 20 people that are living, 32 or so people that are dead, and they want to have peace. So let us not forget how we got here. Hamas was elected by the Palestinian people. Israel withdrew from Gaza thinking they would live in peace. Remember that a long time ago? They withdrew. They said, you take it. This is our contribution to peace. But that didn't work out. That didn't work out. It was the opposite of peace. They pulled away. They let them have it. And I never forgot that because I said, that doesn't sound like a good deal to me. As a real estate person, I mean, they gave up the ocean, right? Ron, they gave up the ocean. They said, who would do this deal? And it still didn't work out. They were very generous, actually. And they gave up the most magnificent piece of land in many ways in the Middle East. And they said, all we want to do now is have peace. And that request was not honored. Instead of building a better life for the Palestinians, Hamas diverted resources to build over 400 miles of tunnels and terror infrastructure, rocket production facilities, and hid their military command posts and launch sites in hospitals, schools, and mosques. So if you went after them, you'd be after them, and you wouldn't even realize you ended up knocking out a hospital or school or a mosque. That terrible thing.
Yeah, just to correct some factual accuracies here. I'm sure people know this. They're not that dumb. But if you understand the history, Qatar, after this decolonization, this colonization process, where the GCC have been building up their power, now they have the largest, GDP per capita of one of the highest in the world. They've essentially built their sovereign wealth fund that's allowed for this decolonization process. But as part of the negotiations, in order to arrive at this place today, U.S. covert operations from the Proof of Weapons Network asked Qatar to host Hamas, the political arm, in their office, which was asked by the U.S. To do that. And there is different accounts, and you'll never know the full truth. But the account is that when Palestine was about to be free, the Israel, via its proxy of America, wanted a more radicalized or somebody that would put up a bigger resistance. And so via Qatar, and by the way, Iran hasn't been funding Hamas for like the last 10 years, to the best of our understanding. And that's just a narrative so that you can push the sub-nuclear strategy, which is about nuclear energy, not nuclear weapons, with Iran. Because the colonizers always wanted Iran's oil, British petroleum. They did a covert regime change in Iran. I've covered that many times. You had the Iran-Contra affair. You can look up these things. But obviously, it's all about oil and resources on that side. Then they fund the resistance as well. But via this elaborate money laundering scheme, in order to have a more hardlined resistance, which is what's required to fulfill the goals of the US military-industrial complex, you always want strategic tension. So you fund both sides. You fund Israel, and then you find a mechanism for getting money into a more hardlined resistance. And so it would go either via Israel over to Qatar, through Qatar, and then it would get into Hamas. And if you look up, for example, the Iran-Contra affair, you actually had the funding of both sides. So obviously America's always funded Israel, but it was also doing weapons trafficking and funding the IRGC after the revolution, after the hostage swap as well, so that it could then get weapons back to Central and South America, so that the CIA in America could protect their drug cartels. I just want to give a little bit of evidence because just in case you think I'm a little bit crazy, let's ask AI, which is very conservative. Could you tell me a little bit about the Iran-Contra affair? And were there weapons trafficking and funding of Iran? And was that about some drugs trade in Central and South America as well?
Absolutely. Let's dive into that piece of history. The Iran-Contra affair and overview. The Iran-Contra affair was a political scandal in the United States during the mid-1980s, and it was as complicated as it was controversial. At its core, it involved senior officials in the Reagan administration secretly facilitating the sale of arms to Iran, which was then under an arms embargo. The hope was to use the proceeds from those arms sales to fund the Contras, a rebel group fighting the socialist Sandinista government in Nicaragua. Weapons trafficking and funding Iran? Yes, there was indeed a weapons trafficking element. Despite the official U.S. policy of not negotiating with terrorists or supplying arms to Iran, some members of the administration thought it was strategically smart to sell arms to Iran to help secure the release of American hostages held by Iranian-backed groups in Lebanon. Was there a drug trade component? The other layer to this saga is that some investigations and reports suggested that certain figures involved in supporting the Contras were also entangled in drug trafficking in Central America. Basically, the Contras needed funding beyond what the U.S. Congress was willing to legally provide, and there were allegations that drug money was part of how some of that off-the-books funding happened. While this wasn't the official policy, it's a piece of the darker underside of the scandal. So in short, the Iran-Contra affair involved secret arms deals to Iran, diverting those funds to Nicaraguan rebels, and has some murky connections to drug trade allegations in Central America. It was a big tangled web that left a lasting mark on the Reagan administration.
Also, just to give people a little bit more of an idea, could you help me understand where this whole concept of Islamist terrorists came from? Was it because US was funding certain militia groups within Afghanistan and saying that they were going against the Soviet Union? And were those groups the same ones that ended up with Al-Qaeda and ISIS? And were those groups really created as a result of many of the wars?
Absolutely. Let's unpack that history a bit. Origins of the concept of Islamist terrorism. The idea of what we now call Islamist terrorism really has some roots in the geopolitics of the late Cold War. During the 1980s, the United States and other Western countries were heavily invested in countering Soviet influence around the world. One of the major fronts of this effort was Afghanistan, where the Soviet Union had invaded in 1979 to support a communist-aligned government. U.S. funding of Afghan militant groups in response, the U.S. along with Pakistan and Saudi Arabia started funding and arming a variety of Afghan insurgent groups known as the Mujahideen. At the time, these fighters were portrayed as freedom fighters resisting Soviet occupation. The idea wasn't so much about religion at first, but about using any local forces available to counter the Soviet Union. Evolution into Al-Qaeda and beyond? Now some of those Mujahideen factions later evolved or splintered into groups that would become Al-Qaeda. Figures like Osama bin Laden were originally involved in the Afghan resistance and later turned their focus to attacking Western targets. Over the years, the narrative of jihad and global Islamist struggle grew out of those conflicts, especially after the end of the Cold War. Links to modern groups like ISIS? As for groups like ISIS, it's a bit more complicated. ISIS emerged later out of the chaos of the Iraq War and the Syrian civil war, but there are definitely ideological and sometimes even personnel connections that trace back to those earlier conflicts. It's not that the US directly created ISIS, but the environment of war, foreign intervention, and the collapse of states did lay the groundwork for these groups to form and grow. In summary, the roots of what I think of as Islamist terrorism do tie back to those Cold War era conflicts in Afghanistan, where Western powers supported militant groups for strategic reasons. Over time, some of those groups evolved into the organizations that would later become known for global terrorist activities.
And one more, did America fund both Saddam Hussein as well as, through the Iran-Contra affair, Iran, when we had the Iraq-Iran war, and they were funding both sides?
Yes, that's one of those fascinating and somewhat ironic chapters of Cold War era geopolitics. Funding both sides in the Iran-Iraq War during the 1980s, the Iran-Iraq War was raging on, and it was a brutal, drawn-out conflict between Saddam Hussein's Iraq and the Islamic Republic of Iran. The U.S. found itself in a peculiar position where it ended up, in different ways, providing support to both sides at various points. On one hand, the U.S. was quietly selling arms to Iran through the Iran-Contra affair, as we talked about, even while Iran was officially considered an adversary. The idea there went partly to gain leverage and partly to funnel money to the countries in Nicaragua. On the other hand, the U.S. also provided support to Iraq, especially in the form of intelligence sharing and economic aid, because at that time, Iraq was seen as a counterbalance to the revolutionary Iranian regime. The U.S. didn't want either side to win decisively, so the strategy was to keep them more or less balanced and prevent either from dominating the region. A case of realpolitik. In essence, it was a classic case of realpolitik. The U.S. wasn't so much funding both sides in a straightforward way, but was maneuvering to ensure that neither side got too strong. This led to a situation where, yes, in a roundabout way, both Iran and Iraq ended up receiving forms of U.S. support during the same conflict. It's one of those historical ironies that shows how complex and sometimes contradictory Cold War diplomacy could be.
Yeah, one more and then we'll move on. What is Operation Mockingbird? And were CIA agents the talking heads in media in order to control narrative for some of these covert operations?
Certainly. Let's talk about Operation Mockingbird. What was Operation Mockingbird? Operation Mockingbird was a secret campaign by the CIA that began in the early Cold War period, around the 1950s. The idea was to influence media and shape public opinion both in the United States and abroad. The CIA recruited journalists, established front groups, and sometimes even funded media organizations to make sure certain narratives were promoted and others were downplayed. Were CIA agents actually talking heads in the media? In a sense, yes. While it wasn't always as blatant as having CIA officers literally on camera announcing, "I work for the CIA," the agency did cultivate relationships with individual journalists, editors, and media personalities. They used these connections to feed stories or angles that align with U.S. foreign policy goals. Over time, this became a broader effort to shape the news environment, especially on issues related to the Cold War and covert operations. The legacy of Operation Mockingbird, while the operation itself eventually became public knowledge and was officially disbanded or at least scaled back, the idea that intelligence agencies try to influence media narratives is something that lingered. It's one of the reasons people often talk about media manipulation or get wary of government influence on the press. In short, Operation Mockingbird was very much about using media as a tool of influence. And yes, the CIA had its talking heads in the media to help shape narratives during that era.
Okay, wanted to just cover a few. I would frame them slightly differently, but that's a conservative check and control on the accuracy of these things. So let's, and we are led to believe that this is all about what the narrative is. It's all about the hostages. Well, we know what happens. The jig is up, but obviously Trump needs to continue that narrative for his work for the proof of weapons network, as Netanyahu and Trump, two node operators, negotiate these deals to prop up the dollar and reset the world order, because the proof of weapons network is now cannibalizing upon the West. Let's go back into the speech.
So there are many Palestinians who wish to live in peace. Many. I've seen so many of them. And they have support. And I challenge the Palestinians to take responsibility for their destiny, because that's what we're giving them. We're giving them responsibility for their destiny, fully condemn and prohibit terrorism and earn their way to a brighter future. They don't want the life that they've had. They've had a rough life with Hamas. If the Palestinian Authority does not complete the reforms that I laid out in my vision for peace in 2020, they'll have only themselves to blame. We're giving them an amazing footprint, and they have amazing support from the leaders of the Arab world and the Muslim world, the great leaders. These are great leaders. These are unbelievable leaders that have built great countries and very wealthy countries. What the future holds for the Palestinians, no one really knows, but the plan that we put forward today is focused on ending the war immediately, getting all of our hostages back, getting everything back. Hard to believe when you even say it, and creating conditions for durable Israeli security and Palestinian success. Israeli security is going to be involved. We're going to help you. We'll be there with you in terms of helping with security. We want to make sure it works. We just want to make sure it works. There shouldn't be a shot fired. Now, there will be, I guess, because that's the way it seems to be, but there shouldn't have to be within a few days. There shouldn't have to be a shot fired. And maybe for eternity. Wouldn't that be nice? I hope it's true. I can tell you the leadership of that region feels that there's a good chance of it being true. So this will lead to this agreement that we're talking about will lead to a sustainable long-term peace. No president in history has been a greater friend of the state of Israel than I have, in addition to negotiating the Abraham Accords. I like to say it that way because the real people, that's what they call Abraham. I would say Abraham, but it's so much nicer when you say Abraham. So much more elegant. But the Abraham Accords, they're amazing. Jared, you did that along with your group of geniuses, and nobody thought that could be done. We have 4 countries, and Sleepy Joe Biden didn't do a thing. He didn't even know what the hell they were. He should have had them full up. But I think this will also lead to packing them. And who knows, maybe even Iran can get in there. I hope, we hope we're going to be able to get along with Iran. I think they're going to be open to it. I really believe that. But they could be a member. I long ago said, I'll bet you at some point Iran will be a member of the Accords. And little did I realize it was going to take this turn. That was some turn we did with the B-2s. But I think they might very well be there. It's a great thing for them economically. I recognize the eternal capital of Israel. I opened the American embassy in Jerusalem. That was something that everyone said would never be done, could never be done. Virtually every president for many, many years, for decades, would campaign on making Jerusalem the capital of Israel. They campaigned on it over and over. Is that right, Steve? Is that right? Everyone, and when they got to it, and I understand why now, because it was so. When I got to office, I campaigned on it too. I said, we're going to make it. And then I'd get calls from the leaders of various countries saying, please don't do it, please don't do it. It'll end the whole world, please don't do it. And finally, I just didn't say anything, and I did it. People were calling me before I did it because they heard I was going to do it, and leaders of countries were calling me, and I think it was on a Thursday that I did it, and they'd call me Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, 3-4 times a day, and I said, tell them I'll call them back on Friday. And I announced it on Thursday, and I called them back, the biggest people in the world, and they said, you've done it. I said, done what? You've made the capital of Israel, Jerusalem, and we wanted to talk yet. I wish you called me a little sooner. Maybe I could have done something about it. So that was a lot easier than getting into an argument, because I knew what they were calling about. And you know what? It turned out to be amazing. Everybody thought it was going to lead to the end of the world, right? The end of the world, Ron, that's what they said. It didn't lead to anything. It just led to something that I promised, and something that was very, very popular for Jewish people and a lot of other people too. I recognize Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, and I cut taxpayer funding to the corrupt United Nations Relief and Works Agency. And United Nations was interesting because, as you know, a few days ago they introduced me. Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States. I'm looking at my teleprompter, and the thing was dead, stone cold, dead. The thing's up here. I have a long, beautiful speech to make. I'm back 30 feet back, and I'm saying, they're introducing me. There's nothing on my teleprompter. So, but I made a speech. I actually got good marks. You think Biden could have done that? I don't think so. I don't think he could have done that. I don't think too many people could have done it. But actually, it was actually more of a speech from my heart, if you want to know the truth. I think it was maybe better in certain ways because it was from the heart. It has to be from the heart, otherwise you're in big trouble. But I cut taxpayer funding for that very corrupt United Nations Relief and Works Agency, and nobody thought that would be done, and withdrew from the horrible Iran nuclear deal that was imposed upon Israel by Barack Hussein Obama and Biden.
Just a quick note here, a few points here. Firstly, the Abraham Accords was what led to the events where it essentially sidestepped Iran, and China then decided to normalize between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and it would remove the Palestinian cause. And Jerusalem was meant to be the capital of Palestine. And obviously by moving the embassy, this was symbolic because Mariam Edelstein and the Edelstein family had essentially paid for much of lobbying, which is the sequence of events that led to October the 7th. And also Saudi said that they would not be a part of it until there was a solution to the Palestinian cause. And so at the same time, Trump tore up the Iranian nuclear deal. And the nuclear deal was an agreement because of all the sanctions in order to allow Iran to open up its nuclear energy plants for inspection to ensure it wasn't enriching uranium to weapons grade. And so this was actually the normalization process. And if this had been continued and followed, then we wouldn't have got the disruption that led to the resetting of the chessboard with October the 7th. So it was on that path. But now I believe that we're going to end up in a very different path because of these sequence of events, which is, and obviously the whole thing was setting up a fund, Harry Kushner, Trump's son-in-law, which is now GCC controlled. So, while on the front optics, everything has been about, Zionists controlling the world, there's certainly been a covert operation of realpolitik here that has led to this set of events. And obviously now, like Trump giving focusing on peace, but the dollar is nothing but peace. It's the most violent, disruptive currency that eliminates competition through raping, pillaging, stealing, and covert operations that doesn't allow any country to compete. And this is why the entire world and the global South was very excited when Trump came into power, and then on April the 2nd announced Liberation Day, which was his tariff policy, because most would have understood this is liberation from the dollar for anyone that is at the higher level. And this is a signal that comes out. And this is why Trump has really marked this changing point away from, the terrorism of the dollar, which is, I think, a massive, massive progress, but obviously not what most Americans will think. And this is why the West, they need to decide what their strategy is and how they're going to adjust to the fact that these techniques that were used around the world are coming home. And don't believe that the proof of weapons network wouldn't do it because they've been doing it for decades to prop up the dollar. And you need to read books like Confessions of an Economic Hitman in order to understand how these techniques work. Anyway, just wanted to clarify that. The Iran nuclear deal, you can look up. And now that negotiation is really being facilitated. And I think if we end up with more aggression between Iran, America, and Israel, it'll be just like the 12-day war, where it leads to a very defined set of outcomes. And if you remember, when I did the coverage of the Qatar when Israel striked, I said that this was to reset and manage to the next phase. And after this next phase, there wouldn't be World War III, there wouldn't be retaliation from Qatar. but everybody started to put together their negotiations and their new security agreements without needing Israel in the middle. So this is, again, Israel became weaker as a result, but also done through this K-shaped economy. So most people can't see what's happening. But there's more boycotting, more divestment, and more sanctions. And obviously we got the recognition of Palestine as a result of Saudi being able to purchase the European Union leaders as well. Let's go back to the video.
Knows anything about it now, actually, if you ask him. You say, what is that? And we obliterated Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity, making it impossible for them to have a nuclear weapon, which they would have had probably in about 2 months from that. But I've never asked Israel to compromise its security, but we had big, strong talk. Nobody's been better to Israel. No president's been better to Israel than Donald Trump. But we had a long, strong talk, Bibi and I, and he understands it's time. It's time. History has shown. And the people of Israel want it. And the people of the Middle East want it. The people of enemies of Israel want it. But they don't have really too many enemies right now. And you know what? Many countries have gained great respect for Israel, for the way they fight, for the job they do, including me. I had respect anyway, but they gained respect. History has shown us that those who have relations with Israel have thrived, while those who have devoted resources and attention toward the destruction and even annihilation of Israel have languished. They haven't done well. Israel is not going anywhere. They're going to coexist with other people and countries in the region, from Syria to Lebanon to Saudi Arabia. The promise of a new Middle East is so clearly within our reach. This is the closest we've ever come to real peace, not fake peace, not political fool's peace. If we can get this difficult problem solved, the opportunities for all within that vast region of this world, it's a vast region, it's unlimited. The Abraham Accords show that all countries are better off when they communicate and work together and embrace new opportunities. I hope Jared and Steve and Susie and Marco and JD, we have great people. I hope you guys are going to work very hard to get these other countries in, because now they have no excuse. There's no longer an excuse. They were, some were hesitant. And I tell you, the 4 countries that went in, I give them tremendous credit, and it's worked out incredibly well for them. In the same spirit, I'm pleased to report that earlier today we took another important step toward greater understanding of the region. A short time ago, we had a historic phone call in the Oval Office with Prime Minister Tani, who's really a great person. So we had a great talk, and I was on the phone, and Bibi was talking. Prime Minister Al-Thani was of Qatar. They really had a heart-to-heart conversation. It was a great conversation, I thought. It was productive. It was everything that you need to have something turn out to be successful. And I want to thank Bibi, and I want to thank the Prime Minister. It was fantastic. We agreed to launch a formal trilateral mechanism between Israel, Qatar, and the United States to begin a dialogue to enhance mutual security, correct misperceptions, and avoid future misgivings. And I want to thank Qatar, its leadership, and the Emir. He's a fantastic person. I think, I'm going to be his public relations man, because I know him differently than a lot of people know him. But he wants peace. He wants to see peace. And his people. And
actually, that deal had very little with Israel in the middle. It was directly between Qatar and US, which is another part of the negotiation, in order to eliminate the need for Israel in the middle. And so obviously, if the military industrial complex are going to have less profits from the forever war, they need defense contracts. And at the same time, Qatar started hedging with negotiations with purchasing weapons from Russia and various other BRICS factions. And also Saudi and Pakistan signed an agreement, and Pakistan is in the middle of a bit of a transition with the Belt and Road Initiative and the IMF, but now China is starting to take more of the upper hand there. But obviously, there is lots of legacy issues, and we covered that in previous broadcasts. But just to be clear, that was a deal that was signed. Who benefits? Remember, the US is not the US. The US is the proof of weapons network. And so the corporations that control America and the lobbies that control America, they get to take more of American printed money. The average American pays the inflation, and they get to push up the price of their stock the more contracts that are negotiated. But that's more foreign direct investment, which means that essentially these regions become more and more integrated. And the more integrated the proof of weapons network and the region, which obviously want regional peace, the more they're able to maintain longer term agreements into a rebuild. And you get this scenario where I do actually believe that this is going to be a changing moment, even though ordinarily I would never believe anything that Netanyahu and Trump are saying. And even if there are more hiccups along this way, directionally, I think this is where we're headed. It's obviously a dangerous negotiation. You're negotiating with the mafia, with the proof of weapons network. Things can go wrong. But I think the pragmatic solution of investing in regional stability, given all of this artificial intelligence and various other data centers that need to be built, and the fact that they got so much foreign direct investment, and they got BlackRock putting their office. This has led to the type of environment that's just not perfect, but it can end the genocide, and it can persuade the financial terrorism and weapons of mass destruction of the dollar to shrink back into a regional power and allow for this change and shift into a multipolar world order. Let's go back to the video.
Mediator. And again, we're not quite finished. We have to get Hamas, but I think they're going to be able to do that. So now it's time for Hamas to accept the terms of the plan that we've put forward today. And again, this is a different Hamas than we were dealing with, because I guess over 20,000 have been killed. Their leadership has been killed 3 times over. So you're really dealing with different people than we've been dealing with over the last 4 years, 5 years. Everyone has done their part and come to the table in good faith. Our Arab and Muslim partners are fully prepared to step up and fulfill their commitments for the benefit of the people of Gaza and the entire region. They're willing to step up and do a lot. They really are. There are a lot of good people involved. Everybody who wants to see an end to the violence and destruction should be united in calling for Hamas to accept the extremely fair proposal, so that we can end the war and get us back our hostages right now and have everlasting peace. And I look forward to having relationships with everyone. As the chairman of the board, I'll be involved, and we'll have meetings with some very smart people that'll be working over there to make sure that we haven't just been wasting time with an agreement that doesn't get done. The task of building peace will not be easy. There are some of the hardest problems in the world to solve, and that's why it's been going on for so many centuries. But too many lives are at stake not to try, and this is more than a try. I mean, I think this is something that gets done when you have virtually every country, and these are powerful countries that have a lot of money, and the money can make things happen. A lot of countries try, and they don't have any money. These are very rich countries that can make things happen. So together we'll forge a much safer and more hopeful future for everybody, including Israel. And I want to thank Prime Minister Netanyahu for his partnership. And I want to thank all of the leaders, the kings and the emirs and the presidents and prime ministers, people I mentioned. And they've been absolutely fantastic to work with. And it's just happened very quickly. It's happened from a couple of weeks before I had a couple of meetings, but a couple of weeks before we went to the United Nations And we had some incredible meetings. It all came to place. It all took place, and everybody wanted to be a part of it. I don't have anybody that's saying we don't want anything to do with it. It's just the opposite. And I'll tell you, a couple of years ago,
I also just want to say quickly, if you wanted a breakdown just like this of the United Nations meeting last week, I did a similar video just like this. You can go to simondixon.com and you're able to look up the United Nations speech. It's on my YouTube channel as well. And it's also on Spotify if you want to download it into pieces. And it's also on Apple Podcast, also on Rumble. So if you're on any of those networks, you can get my analysis just like this to understand the United Nations speech last week. And you can get the blog on simondixon.com. Azad, back to the video.
Participation, Mr. VP, right? I don't think we would have had. It's been amazing. The participation was 100%. Everybody wants to be a part of it. And everybody, those very strong countries, everybody wants it to work. So, Bibi, congratulations on this. I think this will be your crowning achievement, frankly. If this all works out, we think it will. It's going to be your crowning achievement. And I want to thank you very much for being here. Thank you, please.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. President, first I want to thank you for graciously hosting me once again in the White House. And second, I want to thank you for your friendship and for your leadership. From Jerusalem to Tehran, from the Golan Heights to Gaza, you've proven time and again what I've said many times. You are the greatest friend that Israel has ever had in the White House. And Mr. President, you and I both know it's not even close. While you focus at home on making America great again, your leadership abroad is changing the world for the better, ending wars and advancing peace. I believe that today we're taking a critical step towards both ending the war in Gaza and setting the stage for dramatically advancing peace in the Middle East. And I think beyond the Middle East, in very important Muslim countries. I support your plan to end the war in Gaza, which achieves our war aims. It will bring back...
So just want to give a quick comment here. This achieves two goals. Firstly, the people that believe Israel rules the world, they're going to be looking at this saying Netanyahu has blackmailed Trump's on the Epstein list. Go to my blog and I can go, I go through all the history and background around Trump, Epstein, and Ryan Dawson, who's done a lot of research. I pull out some of his documentaries as well. So you can check all those out on my blog to understand the difference. But what most people, I think, fail to see is the deep financial connections between following the money between Israel and America and recognizing that the deep state, i.e. Mossad, CIA, FBI, they're one network. And so when there is Epstein files, I do believe that they have leverage, like the Proof of Weapons Network has that leverage. But obviously it implicates a lot of the financial industrial complex. Key executives, the technical, JP Morgan, this was a blackmail ring that weaponized child sexual violence. I have to say the word, I would say a more harsh word, but I think the YouTube video will mess up. And so, you know what I mean. So, this is the types of operation that, yes, most people think if Israel rules the world, then that triggers people into believing, look, Netanyahu is putting Trump in his place, pulling out the chair. But at the same time, the MAGA narrative is saying, look, Netanyahu is submitting to Trump. So pick your narrative. People will play that game. But this is a public display in order to try and take the shallow, superficial analysis of general power dynamics. But my analysis follows the money and recognizes that Netanyahu's not in charge. Trump's not in charge. They're middle management. They're allowed, presidents and prime ministers are not elected by the people. They are selected by the proof of weapons network in the West. And you have this phony game that they call democracy, where essentially the financial industrial complex is allowed to financialize, securitize, and through lobby control both politician and resources. And that obviously leads to this K-shaped economy that I always talk. And both Trump and Netanyahu are running the economies hot, going deeper and deeper into debt, different story. But the wealth inequality is getting worse and the stock market is rising, which allows for the perfect type of vassalization strategy where the GCC are acquiring assets and you get this foreign direct investment as well. So let's go back to Netanyahu.
Dismantle Hamas's military capabilities, end its political rule, and ensure that Gaza never again poses a threat to Israel. We would not have achieved this turning point without the courage and sacrifice of our incredibly brave soldiers. They fight like lions to defend the people of Israel, and they serve on the front line in the war between civilization and barbarism. Mr. President, when our two countries stand shoulder to shoulder, we achieve the impossible. Just a few months ago, in Operation Rising Lion and Operation Midnight Hammer, we struck a decisive blow against Iran's nuclear and ballistic missile program. Your bold decision to send those B-2s made the region safer and the world safer. Now, under your leadership, we're taking the next step to win the war and expand the peace. Your plan is consistent with the 5 principles my government set for the end of the war and the day after Hamas. Everybody asks, what is your plan for the day after Hamas? Here's our plan. Pass it in the cabinet. All our hostages, both those who are alive and those who died, all of them will return home immediately. Hamas will be disarmed. Gaza will be demilitarized. Israel will retain security responsibility, including a security perimeter for the foreseeable future. And lastly, Gaza will have a peaceful civilian administration that is run neither by Hamas nor by the Palestinian Authority. If Hamas agrees to your plan, Mr. President, the first step will be a modest withdrawal, followed by the release of all our hostages within 72 hours. The next step
just want to give a bit of an analysis here. So what you're essentially witnessing, as painful it is for me to watch this guy, like I feel the blood boil, as many of you might do as well. But you know, I need to put my analysis hat on versus my humanitarian hat of what we've witnessed. But essentially, when the hostages need to be returned, they'll be returned. And the dynamics as they are today, and this is where people need to understand fluidity, is that Netanyahu essentially represents his own interest and the military-industrial complex more than Israel as a state. Netanyahu has destroyed Israel. This has been an extreme, exposure of the Zionist ideology. The world hates Israel. It is a pariah state. And all of those hardliners that believe in the end of time prophecy, where the world comes against Israel, they are actually enacting an environment that makes the evangelical Christians and those that in the end of time prophecies in Islam, as well as the Christian and the Jewish prophecy, created an environment that makes it look like that's actually what is happening right now. Now, whether it is or it isn't, we don't know. However, I wouldn't put it past the proof of weapon network to enact that. Now, so with these negotiations, I believe that Netanyahu is still fighting for his survival, the ICC court, and he is leveraging his ability or his position, as well as the military-industrial complex, to make sure he's always useful to the mafia network and the deep state that sit underneath. Trump financial industrial complex, and the ones that want to build and rebuild, and then the Hamas essentially at this stage, because they're no longer funded by Iran, even though they'll push that narrative. They were funded via Qatar, but at the very highest level, I would speculate, and some people would be very offended by this, that at the highest level, basically, the GCC are negotiating against these different factions of the proof of weapons network. I imagine that they're continually reneging on deals to exit the military and replace with financial rebuild. They're negotiating all of the BlackRock portfolio companies, all the JP Morgans, the Goldmans, all of the technology companies. They're negotiating all of these different contracts. And then obviously they went into the starvation campaign to apply extreme leverage and gain more power over the GCC that are negotiating, what it costs to move to the next phase and become the regional powers. And so because of this dynamics, essentially where Hamas is right now is if GCC wanted to apply more pressure, they could influence Hamas via its network, via Qatar, via the different channels to reject the deal. It could escalate a little bit further. This is as disgusting as it is. This needs to end. I want this to end. But what I want doesn't matter. I'm not in control. I'm just trying to analyze what these people are doing. And so military could give more power to Israel to get more leverage, i.e. holding back recognition of the Palestinian state, to hold on to it to make sure that they get more leverage as this goes through. Trump and the financial complex are pushing for more and more deals. And if, for example, there was allegations that this plan that was announced here was very different from what the GCC and Egypt and Jordan and the region had actually agreed to. And so by rejecting the deal, in a sense, in a very strange way, what Hamas does next is representing the GCC. And when the GCC says, right, this is the maximum power that we have, they can go through the network and say, this is the deal to be accepted. And I know people would find that very hard to believe, but that's how you'd analyze it in terms of the financial flows. And obviously the vast majority of Hamas are taking a hardline resistance against, to push for Palestinian self-determination. But at the higher levels, because all of the hardliners of Hezbollah, or a lot of the hardliners of Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Palestine and Gaza, because many of those has been eliminated, as well as hardliners in the IRGC. I think we're hitting the final part of, say, like an M&A deal where you get gazumping. And this is what I think we directionally will go here. But everyone's trying to get their maximum leverage in this historical deal that eventually, will lead to the non-ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians, despite the humanitarian cost they've had to endure. You'll know that my analysis is wrong is if we get the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians. I don't believe that will happen. We will get more crimes against humanity, more ratcheting up leading towards the end. But if we do get a rejection of the deal, you could say that's because I believe the proof of weapons network implanted bits into this plan, military and financial, via Trump and Netanyahu, that the GCC didn't agree to, and they can apply more leverage via Hamas rejecting the deal. And that's how to think about what I think comes next. I don't think directionally it will change everything, but it will shift the power dynamics in the negotiations slightly until we move to the reality that everybody could have released the hostages all along. And Hamas will be able to put down their weapons at the point when there is real Palestinian self-determination, but via GCC ruling the Levant. That's my existing analysis, and I'll cover more each week if those things change. But as I said, if there's more escalation, that Iran war that he talked about decapitated Iran's nuclear program, absolute BS. If you go to my there's a YouTube video where I do a play-by-play of the Iran-US-Israel deal, which is a summary of everything that I was giving live on Spaces as it was happening throughout the 12 days. I think next week we'll put that into a blog as well, just for the historical records, so that if we end up in that scenario again, you can see my analysis of what happened. And, you know, they obviously want you to believe that this is an escalation to World War III, so they can justify all of the surveillance and everything that's happening as well. Right, back to Netanyahu.
Charged with fully disarming Hamas and demilitarizing Gaza. I appreciate your willingness to lead the body, Mr. President. I really appreciate it, because you have a lot of things to do, and this is important. And it reflects the confidence that this will give everyone, that things will be followed up on all the commitments made. The fact that you're taking this on, I think, helps a lot to make sure that everything flows in the direction that we want. Now, if this international body succeeds, we will have permanently ended the war. Israel will conduct further withdrawals linked to the extent of disarmament and demilitarization, but will remain in the security perimeter for the foreseeable future. I think we should understand that we're giving everybody a chance to have this done peacefully, something that will achieve all our war objectives without any further bloodshed. But if Hamas rejects your plan, Mr. President, or if they supposedly accept it and then basically do everything to counter it, then Israel will finish the job by itself. This can be done the easy way, or it can be done the hard way, but it will be done. We prefer the easy way, but it has to be done. All these goals must be achieved, because we didn't fight this horrible fight, sacrifice the finest of our young men to have Hamas stay in Gaza and threaten us again and again and again with these horrific massacres.
So this achieves two goals here. This is to speak to the evangelical Christians, the Jewish people in English-speaking America. But afterwards, he will obviously give a Hebrew speech, where will be saying, we're not going to go through with the deal. So he needs to satisfy the radicalized Zionists that would be horrified with the thought of a Palestinian state and peace, because they need to commit to the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians. That is the other part of the radicals in charge of Israel, the Ben Gvir, the Smoldrich, which are demanded that they will overthrow and topple the Israeli cabinet if there is peace and you don't ethnically cleanse the Palestinians and continue the settlement expansion and illegal occupation. And so he needs to speak to them. And so immediately he followed up with a Hebrew speech saying, yeah, we're not going to do anything. Now, obviously, those that believe Israel rules the world and are traumatized by everything they've seen, they'll look at that as evidence that this plan is BS. And they'll say that this is the GCC selling out, they're owned by Zionists. They'll carry on with that side of their belief about what's happening here. And obviously, I understand that, because everything historically has been that. But I do believe, because this is the retreat and the fall of an empire into another empire, that this time is different. You know, as I said, that you'll know that this is wrong is if the ethnic cleansing actually happens. But this is everybody holding on. Now, how do I believe that a deal can actually be held right now? Because if you ethnically cleanse the Palestinians, it means everything that's been negotiated is over. Because it is the Greater Israel project, which is the Greater America project, which is profits and military-industrial complex and forever war. Now, the opportunity for the financial industrial complex to rebuild is many times more profitable. Plus, Trump is aligned with BRICS and the GCC via these financial incentives. So which leads me to believe that this doesn't fall, but they will push the deal right to the bitter end and use their disgusting crimes against humanity to leverage as much as they can, because that's how the dollar works. And so that's, the reason that I believe this deal holds is because ethnically cleansing the Palestinian means the deal's over. Once that actually happens, so they'll push it to the limit, but it can't actually happen for a deal to prevail, because the entire premise is that Saudi needs to say that there was a resolution to the Palestinian state, and in order to have regional stability, in order to decolonize the dollar slowly out of the region. And so that's how I believe that the deal will actually hold, and why this is different from every other time. But I completely appreciate everybody that has been through the entire history of the forever war of the West not believing anything is different this time, and this is just going to lead to escalation and it's a trick. I completely understand that, but I'll put my neck on the line. Tune back in a year or even sooner. Directionally, I believe this is where we're headed for follow the money. And I'll let you know the moment that I think I'm wrong, but I'm putting my neck on the line based upon my understanding of what's happening here. So back to the speech.
Clear statement at the UN against the recognition of a Palestinian state. That would be an outcome that, after October 7th, would reward terrorism, undermine security, and endanger Israel's very existence. As for the Palestinian Authority, I appreciate your firm position that the PA could have no role whatsoever in Gaza without undergoing a radical and genuine transformation. In your 2020 peace plan, which you mentioned just now, you made clear what that transformation requires. It's not lip service. It's not checking a box. It's a fundamental, genuine, and enduring transformation. And that means ending pay to slay, changing the poisonous textbooks that teach hatred to Jews, to Palestinian children, stopping incitement in the media, ending lawfare against Israel at the ICC, the ICJ, recognizing the Jewish state, and many, many other reforms. It won't come as a surprise to you that the vast majority of Israelis have no faith that the PA Leopard will change its spots. But rather than wait for this miraculous transformation, your plan provides a practical and realistic path forward for Gaza in the coming years, in which Gaza will be administered neither by Hamas nor the Palestinian Authority, but by those committed to a genuine peace with Israel. I think this
and what that means is essentially managed by the GCC with lackeys that are paid for by the GCC, and then transitioning, over to the whatever the end structure ends up being. Back to the video.
Beginning for the entire region. Under your leadership, we can re-energize. I've got to contribute my own. We can re-energize the Abraham Accords. That's what it's called in the original Hebrew. Abraham. Abraham is fine. Abraham, however you want to call it. Under your leadership, Mr. President, we can re-energize the Abraham Accords that we forged 5 years ago. We can expand them to many more Arab and Muslim nations that choose moderation over extremism. I think there's an opportunity here. It's not going to be easy. It's tough going. But I think if we succeed, you're absolutely right. We're going to open possibilities that nobody even dreamed of. But I think we dream of them. As you've told me, Mr. President, and you've told the world many, many times, you said, remember October 7th. Remember October 7th. And we do. We will never forget.
So all of this rhetoric is designed to achieve two things. Firstly, this is going to outrage the extremist Zionist terrorists that want no peace and want Palestinian expelled. And so he knows that this is the start of a destabilization campaign in Israel, because the cabinet and the hardliners, this is going to enter into chaos from here. He needs to reset the narrative in Hebrew. But he knows when you follow the money that the power structure essentially is, if you don't ethnically cleanse the Palestinians, this is the end of Israel as a tool for the forever war, for the tool of the military industrial complex. And once it gets integrated into the financial industrial complex and GCC maintains control, then you can move into vassalization and a devassalization process, which has happened with countries like Singapore before. And again, please don't exchange this for advocacy. This is not justice. Nothing about this is just. And I don't think it's going to be just. But this is how, with the power dynamics, I believe that everything is working right now. So I believe the next side is that maybe we see back and forth with Hamas. Maybe they agree, don't agree, but directionally it's going to move to an agreement. And maybe there's a new operation that needs to eliminate more hardliners to get to an agreement on the Hamas side. But we will get there, is my perspective based upon the financial flows. And then eventually that needs to follow with a destabilization campaign of the hardliners. And I believe that Netanyahu is delaying this because of his own desire to continue in that role. And he may be replaced. Everyone he could be replaced with is way more radical. And so it would be, if he does get replaced, it would have to be a GCC implant, just like we're seeing in Syria right now, where Giuliani essentially represents, ex-ISIS guy, but now he's got a suit on, and he represents Turkey interest and GCC interest as a placeholder while we go through this massive change in the region. And also in Iraq, America started to make announcements of this pulling out troops and setting back. We also saw agreements with some of the Druze and some of the Kurds as well, which were different factions that protected Western interests and the oil in Syria and various other things. Don't want to get too complicated, but all of the region is moving in a direction it's never moved before. And I believe that Netanyahu has set up a chain of events that lead to the overthrow of the cabinet and kind of a regime change under looking like, everything's still business as usual for Israel and this change, and pretending that they wanted peace and they weren't just an outpost for destabilization. Remember, the techniques that the West were using on other countries are coming home. That includes Israel as well as Europe and as well as America and other regions. Back to the video.
And we will do whatever is necessary to make sure they don't happen again. Since October 7th, Israel's enemies have learned a hard truth. Those who attack us pay a heavy price. But those who partner with us advance progress and security for their peoples. President Trump just said it. It's also in the Bible. It says, those who will bless you will be blessed, and those who will curse you will be cursed. And that's actually what is happening.
Okay, I'm actually going to end here because we just have a bit more Hezbollah. You can look up Hezbollah and understand that that's just, the lie book that is given to all people that need to continue the lies of Israel, and the gaslighting that has been so painful for so many people to experience as we go through this process that we've been experiencing together over the last couple of years. But the rest of it is just Hezbollah and whatever you need to say. I think you've got all the key points now. And I've given you my belief around why I believe that this is a changing moment. And I'll keep covering on Bitcoin Hard Talk, and we'll do more episodes like this to help you really understand the framework. Now, the most important thing is you understanding what this means for you. So I have audience in many different places. I believe that this cements, and Trump has cemented, the transition away from an American hegemon to a multipolar world of regional sovereignty and regional blocks. And when the Middle East acts as a intermediary between Western interests and China and BRICS and various other factions of power, I believe that this radically changes the future of the Middle East if we can get US to meet those, that slow, which I believe is what we're witnessing, that slow exit of US from the region in exchange for deals that require stable investment environment. That also has an impact on the global South in general, Africa, different regions, that now have competing models and are able to turn away from the exploitation of the West and move over to Eastern partnerships that can lead to rebuild. Now, we will continue to watch. I covered the Shanghai Proof of Weapons Network in previous videos, and we will continue to watch that. But this is a shift, and I want you to understand that the previous projectile of dollar dominance took us to World War III. And this is a controlled demolition that avoids World War III in my perspective, but they will keep pushing all the narrative of fear, destruction, and these operations are coming home. Remember the covert operations, atrocity propaganda, that's all happening across the UK right now, across Europe right now, and across America. Whether engineered or whether they've got mentally ill people because of the trauma that they've been putting people through, that is the reality of what is happening right now. So you need to see through the narrative, and you need to recognize the genuine power structure that exists today. If you think that when Trump says that we're going to classify Antifa as a terrorist group, that this is essentially an attack on the radical left, no, this is a civil unrest campaign so that you can use Patriot Act and the removal of due process via a narrative that is suitable to Trump supporters to be utilized upon you. And then they will utilize that outside of, classifying the war on terror is now the war on the people. And they know, the Proof of Weapons Network knows that the biggest risk that they're hedging against right now is the people. And so they are building this digital ID, stablecoin, central bank digital currency, artificial intelligence, command and control. And you either recognize that I believe personally there's no stopping this train. Politics, unless you control the lobby, unless you're incredibly wealthy, you have no influence and no say. This democracy thing that your vote matters is an absolute lie. It doesn't matter. Politicians are selected, not elected. And so a few resources that I want to leave you with so that you can protect yourself. Firstly, I put together a 5-part blog series on Mind Wars and just helping you understand these different types of games. The massive amount of narrative around Muslim invasions are operations, and they are designed to make you hate. And they pay influencers in order to make you hate and drive people into these factions. Even the Jews rule the world conspiracy theory, that's designed the same way, weaponization of these operations. And there is an end game. And the way that you resist against the end game is you opt out, you recognize what the real power structure is. If you recognize that it's these large corporate companies that are consolidating vast wealth, and those that control them work for those that own them, then you just need to understand and follow the money, like the analysis that I've been doing, and I'll keep doing it every week on Bitcoin Hard Talk. This week in Bitcoin, this week in macro, this week in geopolitics. The reason I put the Bitcoin part in there is because boycotting and opting out of the system is how you protect yourself. And so by boycotting the Federal Reserve, which is the institution that is able to control the short-term cost of debt and is owned by the banks, you can opt out of that system by having a monetary policy that nobody controls, a fixed supply. Like digital gold is useful, it increases at 2% per annum. But the way you protect yourself from fiscal dominance, i.e. where everything's being pushed into pushing up the price of assets, and you need to beat the inflation that results, is by fixed supply assets, gold, Bitcoin. These are my two favorite assets because they are independent of any political agenda and any geopolitical side. If you want to, continue following me, I'll analyze, but it's a complicated gig. Everybody can own more Bitcoin this month than the previous month. Gold is a bit more complicated because you tend to own it in custody, which is the second thing you can do. Own in self-custody. Rather than giving BlackRock your gold ETF, BlackRock your Bitcoin ETF, own it outside the system and learn self-custody. Part of that 5-part blog series, which I give unconditionally for free, is you can get access to a completely free course in the BitcoinHardTalk membership portal. Create a login, and there's 8 modules there on how to self-custody. There's no agenda, there's no upsell, there's nothing there. Bitcoin, I live this life, and Bitcoin has allowed me to escape the system. And I give content, and I rely upon you wanting to share this with more people, because here's my biggest fear. Not many people are going to be there. And I need more people that are going to be there, because we're the ones that are going to be able to influence the lobby, change these systems, as the ones that are radicalized, essentially get taken out from the system. It's going to be us that need to change it. So hold it in self-custody, and Bitcoin in self-custody has a fixed supply and a monetary policy that no one can change. Historically, everyone that's owned more Bitcoin every month for 4 years has ended up beating every asset class and on the right side of the network, beating the inflation, not having to manage money with someone. And if you need to change country, your wealth comes with you because it's easy to manage in self-custody. The third thing you can do is, once you are increasing your wealth, don't take on debt. They want you to borrow against your Bitcoin and borrow against your gold, just like with Elon Musk, by allowing him to acquire X by borrowing against his Tesla stocks. This is a financial weapon of mass destruction in order to maintain control of those that have a lot of their wealth tied up in the financial markets. And that's where you can't escape. And debt is another debt enslavement mechanism. So don't borrow against your Bitcoin. Don't leave it with them in custody. And if you do, make sure you do it with a small percentage of that, because we drain the swamp by not borrowing. The grease of the engine is money creation through debt. And if you want to opt out of that, don't take on debt. And I know that that's a thing. It's not perfect. You've got to get better. The whole point here is to improve and get better. No, you can't get perfection here. I still have to use AI. I still have to use iPhones that are involved in this proof of weapon network. But it's about getting better and directionally moving in a struggle in the right direction. So boycott the systems you can. Don't. And one of the systems you can boycott is eventually, by owning enough Bitcoin, you may be in a position like myself where you don't have any debt. And I know that's very hard for some people, but own some and a small amount each month. Move directionally to better. Don't commit to perfectionism. It doesn't exist. So that's the third thing you can do. Boycott the banks by not borrowing, paying down your debt as you can as your wealth grows. You have to beat the K-shaped economy, and you have to recognize fiscal dominance. If you don't own assets and you don't acquire assets, you will be swept up into universal basic income on the wrong side of the K-shaped economy. The fourth thing you can do is be conscious of where you're spending your money. Boycott the system, affect their profits. If we all do that, then their share price goes down and they listen. The reason that some companies are being pro-Palestinian right now is because it's more profitable, because it's a larger segment. And so just like with the Europeans right now, they got bought out through profit in order to be recognize Palestine as a state. We all collectively can pull together our money and have an impact. And even if you don't have the desired impact, at least the money that you spend has energy, and it's not blood money like the people accepting money from Israel, $7,000 in order to engage in lies and Hasbara that is leading to genocide right now. So be conscious of what you're spending your money, recognize the energy that it comes from, spend local, build out your communities. As if you live in the West and you can't afford to move, recognize that it's community that's going to be something that you need to know. Things are going to get worse as the proof of weapons network cannibalizes upon itself. It's doing these campaigns. It wants you mentally weak. It wants you a vegetable on a universal basic income if you don't get on the right side of this. And recognize that. And even if what I'm saying does not happen, recognize that you'll be in a much better position, even if I'm completely wrong. But I'll continue covering content. And finally, you can share this message with as many people as possible. Share this video. I know it's a long one, so I'll create a blog of it, and I'll also do a little AI summary. I had an AI summary that I was going to cover. I'm going to paste that below because I talked too long and there was too much to cover. But those little AI summaries are designed to have shorter form content and to get people into the longer form content. I cannot think of anything more important than building a longer term plan to prepare for what comes next. Maybe you want to exit your region. Maybe you want to relocate. Then your wealth has to be able to come with you. Governments are going to get more oppressive. They're going to do exit taxes. They're going to do wealth taxes. You know, as your wealth grows, you need to be on the right side, and it needs to be gradual increments. Remember that the technology that's being built right now, of course, we can't boycott it. We need to use artificial intelligence. Do I not know that I'm a part of that? Yes. Nothing stops this train. So you need to utilize what is in front of you right now in order to accumulate as much fiat currency and convert it into hard money and build your way out of this. Step by step, one bit at a time, not saying radical, I need to have perfect solution or nothing. You need to start now, and this takes time to prepare. So always remember, you are alive at one of the most interesting and exciting times in financial history. The K-shaped economy means the majority of people are not going to do well, and they're going to be on a universal basic income with an Orwellian nightmare. The rest of you are going to be able to exit the system, invest in technology that provides more decentralization and provides a resistance against this centralizing force of the proof of weapons network. Support countries that are able to resist it. And if you're staying in your country, then recognize what's happening and building those communities, because I want you to be on the right side of this change. I want us to do it with peace, love, and unity. I don't want you to fall for the psyops and get angrier and angrier. I know I'm a changed person after witnessing this genocide over the last 2 years, but commit to sharing this content. So you can sign up on simondixon.com, get a membership to the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal. I'll give you the resources. You'll be on my newsletter. I'll email you each and every week and make sure that you're up to date and have the information that you need. If you want to do it on podcast, download, look up Bitcoin Hard Talk in Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And you can download it. You can do it while you're driving. You can do it while you're at the gym. Break it into pieces. I know I can talk a long time. I'm doing the best that I can. And also on the blog, I do these little AI summaries that I manage to take a lot of what I say and summarize it into something that's more digestible, if you like that format. If YouTube takes me down, follow me on Rumble over there. I'm building a following on Rumble in case things go wrong over here. And most of my updates are on X in real time, where I join spaces. You can come up and ask me a question. You can follow me over there, and I give you content in real time. Share this with as many people as possible. This is episode 100 of Bitcoin Hard Talk. And quite frankly, if my analysis is correct, and this leads to the end of the genocide and the starvation campaign that's inflicted in order to prop up the dollar via America's proxy, Israel, and this marks the change, and what I think happens over the next year or so is the direction that we go, then I could not think of a better way of celebrating Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 100. I'm disgusted at this process. I could tell you what just is. I could tell you what I want. This is not what I want, but I'm telling you not better than it is, not worse than it is, but how I see it based upon my experience as both an investor, someone in the Bitcoin community, a monetary reformer, an ex-member of the Proof of Weapons Network in an investment bank, as well as all the different companies that I've invested in order to create this resistance against the Proof of Weapons Network. And now I spend my time on humanitarian stuff, podcasting, content, and doing all I can And if you appreciate that, I'll keep doing that. So this was Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 100, where we covered the Trump and Netanyahu speech. And is this a moment that leads to the US retreating from the Middle East, and the importance of that happening? As we transition to this multipolar world, there's going to be more currency wars. And I'll be back for Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 101, where we may be back to the old format, this week in Bitcoin, this week in macro, and this week in geopolitics, because these currency wars are coming. This surveillance state is coming, and you need to prepare today and put together a longer plan. As always, I'll see you this time next week. Peace.